Welcome to Murder Midnight, a crime storytelling channel for sleeping, where crime meets calm and mystery meets the mind at rest. Tonight we have another true crime special focusing on American cases again. Before we close our eyes and start, please comment what country you are tuning in from. It will greatly help us here at Murder Midnight. Okay, let's start with story one. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln, April 14th, 1865. Good Friday, April 14th, 1865, should have been a day of celebration for President Abraham Lincoln and the United States of America. Just 5 days earlier, Confederate General Robert E. Lee had surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the Civil War that had torn the nation apart for 4 years. Lincoln had spent the day in meetings discussing Reconstruction and the challenges of reuniting a divided country. That evening, he planned to attend a popular comedy at Ford's Theater with his wife Mary, looking forward to a rare moment of relaxation after years of wartime stress. Instead, that night would witness the first assassination of a sitting American president and launch one of the most intensive manhunts in the nation's history. The shots fired in Ford's Theater would not only end Lincoln's life, but fundamentally change how America protected its leaders and dealt with political violence. The plot to kill President Lincoln was not the work of a single deranged individual, but rather a carefully planned conspiracy involving multiple participants with different motives and levels of commitment. At the center of the conspiracy was John Wilkes Booth, a 26-year-old actor from a prominent theatrical family who had become increasingly radicalized by his support for the Confederacy and his hatred of Lincoln's policies. Booth was born into theatrical royalty. His father, Junius Brutus Booth, was one of America's most famous Shakespearean actors, and his brother Edwin was considered the finest actor of his generation. John Wilkes had achieved considerable success as an actor, particularly in the South, where his passionate performances and handsome appearance had made him a celebrity. However, Booth's success on stage was overshadowed by his growing obsession with politics and his fanatical support for the Confederate cause. Unlike his family members, who were Union supporters, Booth believed passionately in slavery and Southern independence. He had used his acting career as a cover for Confederate activities, including smuggling medical supplies to the South and potentially serving as a Confederate spy. By early 1865, as it became clear that the Confederacy was collapsing, Booth's hatred for Lincoln intensified. He viewed the president as a tyrant who had destroyed the constitutional order and unleashed a devastating war on the South. In Booth's mind, killing Lincoln would be an act of patriotic heroism that might still save the Confederate cause. Booth recruited several accomplices for his conspiracy, though their exact roles and level of commitment varied. Lewis Powell, also known as Lewis Payne, a 20-year-old former Confederate soldier who had been wounded at Gettysburg and had developed into a hardened, violent man. Powell was assigned to kill Secretary of State William Seward. George Atzerodt. A German-born carriage painter and boatman who had helped Confederate agents cross the Potomac River. Atzerodt was assigned to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, though he would ultimately lose his nerve and fail to carry out the attack. David Harold. A 23-year-old pharmacy clerk who knew the Maryland countryside well and was assigned to guide Powell's escape after the attack on Seward. Mary Surratt. The 42-year-old widow who ran the boarding house where the conspirators met to plan their attacks. Her exact level of involvement in the conspiracy remains a matter of historical debate. John Surratt, Mary's son, a Confederate courier who had been involved in earlier plots but was out of the country during the assassination. Samuel Arnold. Michael O'Loughlin, childhood friends of Booth who had participated in earlier kidnapping plots but had withdrawn from the conspiracy by the time of the assassination. Booth's original plan was not to assassinate Lincoln, but to kidnap him and hold him hostage in exchange for Confederate prisoners of war. The kidnapping plot had been in development for months, with Booth and his conspirators conducting surveillance of Lincoln's movements and identifying opportunities to capture him. The most serious kidnapping attempt had been planned for March 17, 1865, when Lincoln was scheduled to attend a performance at a hospital near Washington. However, Lincoln changed his plans at the last minute, leaving the conspirators waiting in vain for a target who never appeared. As the war situation deteriorated for the Confederacy, Booth became increasingly desperate and shifted from kidnapping to assassination. The surrender at Appomattox on April 9th convinced Booth that only dramatic action could save the Southern cause, or at least ensure that Lincoln paid the ultimate price for what Booth saw as his destruction of the constitutional order. April 14th, 1865, began as a day of celebration in Washington, D.C. The city was still rejoicing over Lee's surrender and the effective end of the Civil War. Government buildings were decorated with bunting and flags, and there was a general atmosphere of relief and optimism about the future. President Lincoln spent the morning in meetings with various officials, including Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, discussing the challenges of Reconstruction and the occupation of the defeated South. Lincoln was in a good mood, telling jokes and stories, seemingly relieved that the burden of wartime leadership was finally lifting from his shoulders. The president had originally been reluctant to attend the theater that evening, as he was tired and had much work to do. However, Mary Lincoln had been looking forward to the outing, and the theater had already advertised that the president would be attending the performance of Our American Cousin, a popular comedy starring Laura Keene. The Lincolns' original guests for the evening, General and Mrs. Grant, had declined the invitation, choosing instead to visit their children in New Jersey. This decision may have saved Grant's life, as Booth had planned to kill him along with Lincoln. Instead, the Lincolns were accompanied by Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris, the daughter of a New York senator. John Wilkes Booth spent April 14th making final preparations for his attack. As a famous actor, he had easy access to Ford's Theater and was familiar with its layout. He knew that Lincoln would be sitting in the presidential box, an elevated area on the right side of the theater that provided an excellent view of the stage, but also made the occupants visible and vulnerable. Booth made several visits to Ford's Theater during the day, ostensibly to pick up his mail, but actually to prepare for the attack. He arranged for a horse to be held ready in the alley behind the theater for his escape and prepared his weapons, a single-shot Derringer pistol and a large knife. Most importantly, Booth used his knowledge of the play Our American Cousin to time his attack for maximum effect. He knew that during the third act, there was a scene where the character Asa Trenchard would deliver a line that always drew loud laughter from the audience. "Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You sockdologizing old man-trap." Booth planned to fire his shot during this laughter, hoping it would mask the sound of the gunshot and give him crucial seconds to escape. The Lincoln Party arrived at Ford's Theater at approximately 8:30 p.m., about 30 minutes after the play had begun. As they entered the presidential box, the orchestra played Hail to the Chief, and the audience gave the president a standing ovation. Lincoln bowed to acknowledge the applause, then settled into his rocking chair to watch the performance. The presidential box was inadequately guarded. John Parker, the Washington police officer assigned to protect Lincoln, left his post during the first intermission and did not return. This left Lincoln vulnerable to attack, as there was no one stationed outside the box to prevent unauthorized access. At approximately 10:15 p.m., during the third act of the play, John Wilkes Booth made his way to the presidential box. As an actor who was known at the theater, he had no trouble gaining access to the area behind the box. He quietly opened the door and entered the small anteroom that led to the box itself. Booth waited for the line he knew would generate the loudest laughter, then opened the door to the box proper. Major Rathbone, sitting closest to the door, noticed Booth's entrance, but initially thought nothing of it, assuming he was a theater employee or perhaps someone with legitimate business with the president. At the moment when the audience erupted in laughter at Asa Trenchard's line, Booth raised his Derringer and fired a single shot into the back of Lincoln's head. The bullet entered behind the president's left ear and lodged behind his right eye, causing massive brain damage. The sound of the gunshot was largely masked by the audience's laughter, but the sight of smoke and flame from the pistol immediately alerted those in the presidential box that something was wrong. Major Rathbone leaped up to grab Booth, who dropped his pistol and drew his knife. "Sic semper tyrannis," Booth shouted. "Thus always to tyrants," the motto of Virginia. As Rathbone grappled with him, Booth slashed the major's arm with his knife, inflicting a deep wound that left Rathbone unable to prevent the assassin's escape. Booth then leaped from the presidential box to the stage 12 feet below, a dramatic exit befitting his theatrical background. However, his spur caught in the Treasury flag decorating the box, causing him to land awkwardly and break his left leg. Despite the injury, he managed to stand and shout to the stunned audience, "The South is avenged!" Booth then limped rapidly across the stage and out the back door of the theater, where his horse was waiting as planned. Despite his broken leg, he managed to mount and ride away into the night, beginning a 12-day flight that would become one of the most famous manhunts in American history. The presidential box erupted into chaos following Booth's escape. Mary Lincoln's screams filled the theater as she cradled her husband's head, which was bleeding profusely from the gunshot wound. Clara Harris was also covered in blood from Major Rathbone's slashed arm, adding to the horrific scene. Dr. Charles Leal, a 23-year-old Army surgeon who happened to be in the audience, immediately responded to the emergency. He was the first medical professional to reach Lincoln and quickly determined that the president had suffered a mortal wound. The bullet had entered Lincoln's brain and caused massive damage that was beyond the medical knowledge of the time to repair. Initially, there was consideration of moving Lincoln to the White House, but Dr. Leal determined that the president was too seriously injured to survive the journey. Instead, Lincoln was carried across the street to the Peterson House, a boarding house where he was placed in a small back bedroom. The news of the assassination spread rapidly throughout Washington, and soon government officials, military leaders, and family members were gathering at the Peterson House. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton effectively took control of the government during the crisis, coordinating the response to the assassination and the hunt for the conspirators. While Booth was attacking Lincoln at Ford's Theater, his conspirators were supposed to be carrying out simultaneous attacks on other government leaders. The plan was to decapitate the Union government by killing the president, vice president, and Secretary of State in coordinated strikes. Lewis Powell's attack on Secretary of State William Seward was the most successful of the other planned assassinations. Seward was bedridden at his home, recovering from injuries sustained in a carriage accident several days earlier. Powell gained entry to the Seward home by claiming to be delivering medicine from Seward's doctor. When Seward's son Frederick became suspicious and tried to block Powell's access to his father, Powell beat him severely with his pistol, fracturing Frederick's skull. Powell then burst into Seward's bedroom and attacked the Secretary of State with a knife, slashing his face and neck multiple times. Seward was saved from death by the metal jaw brace he was wearing due to his carriage accident injuries, which deflected some of Powell's knife blows. However, he was severely wounded and bore the scars of the attack for the rest of his life. Powell fought his way out of the house, wounding several other family members and a nurse in the process, and escaped on horseback. George Atzerodt, assigned to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson at the Kirkwood House Hotel where Johnson was staying, lost his nerve and failed to carry out his part of the conspiracy. Instead, he spent the evening drinking at the hotel bar before wandering the streets of Washington. His failure to act meant that Johnson survived to become president upon Lincoln's death. President Lincoln lingered through the night of April 14, 15, surrounded by his family, government officials, and doctors who could do nothing to save him. Mary Lincoln was periodically allowed into the room to be with her husband, though her emotional outbursts often forced her removal. Throughout the night, Lincoln's breathing became increasingly labored as pressure built in his brain from the bullet wound. Dr. Leal and other physicians monitored his vital signs, but there was no hope of recovery from such a massive head injury. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln died. Secretary Stanton, who had maintained a vigil at the president's bedside, reportedly said, "Now he belongs to the ages," though some accounts attribute slightly different words to him. The death of Lincoln plunged the nation into mourning, just as it was celebrating the end of the Civil War. The president who had preserved the Union and freed the slaves was dead, killed by the very forces he had defeated on the battlefield. Even before Lincoln died, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton had begun organizing one of the largest manhunts in American history. Within hours of the assassination, federal troops, police, and detectives were scouring Washington and the surrounding countryside for Booth and his accomplices. Stanton placed Washington under martial law and ordered roadblocks established on all routes leading out of the city. Telegraph wires carried descriptions of Booth and the other conspirators to law enforcement agencies throughout the country. A reward of $100,000, an enormous sum at the time, was offered for information leading to Booth's capture. The investigation quickly identified most of the conspirators. Mary Surratt was arrested at her boarding house, along with Lewis Powell, who had foolishly returned to the Surratt boarding house while trying to escape Washington. George Atzerodt was captured within days, and several other suspects were taken into custody. However, John Wilkes Booth himself remained at large, having fled into southern Maryland with David Harold. The two men had crossed the Potomac River into Virginia, aided by Confederate sympathizers who provided them with food, shelter, and medical attention for Booth's broken leg. Booth and Harold's escape route took them through a network of Confederate sympathizers in Maryland and Virginia who had assisted Southern agents throughout the war. Their first stop was the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd, a Maryland physician who set Booth's broken leg, though Mudd later claimed he did not recognize Booth or know about the assassination. The fugitives then made their way to the home of Samuel Cox, a Confederate sympathizer who hid them in the woods for several days while federal troops searched the area. Cox and his associates eventually helped Booth and Harold cross the Potomac River into Virginia. In Virginia, the fugitives were assisted by Thomas Jones, who provided them with food and newspapers that allowed Booth to read about the national reaction to Lincoln's assassination. Booth was reportedly dismayed to discover that he was being universally condemned as a murderer rather than celebrated as a hero of the Confederate cause. The manhunt was complicated by the fact that many Southern sympathizers were willing to assist Booth, either out of loyalty to the Confederate cause or simply because they opposed the federal government. However, the massive military and police presence in the region made it increasingly difficult for the fugitives to move safely. After nearly 2 weeks on the run, Booth and Harold were traced to a tobacco barn on the farm of Richard Garrett in Caroline County, Virginia. The tip came from Confederate soldiers who had encountered the fugitives and became suspicious of their behavior. On April 26, 1865, federal troops surrounded the Garrett farm and demanded that Booth and Harold surrender. Harold quickly gave himself up, but Booth refused to come out of the barn, declaring that he would fight to the death rather than be captured alive. The soldiers set fire to the barn to force Booth out, but as the flames spread, Sergeant Boston Corbett shot Booth through gaps in the barn wall. Corbett later claimed that he fired because Booth appeared to be aiming his pistol at the soldiers, though some witnesses disputed this account. Booth was dragged from the burning barn, paralyzed from the neck down by Corbett's bullet, which had severed his spinal cord. He lingered for several hours, asking to see his hands and reportedly saying, "Tell my mother I died for my country." He died at approximately 7:15 a.m. on April 26th, 12 days after assassinating Lincoln. The remaining conspirators were tried by a military tribunal rather than in civilian courts, a controversial decision that reflected the government's view that the assassination was an act of war rather than simply a criminal act. The trial began on May 10, 1865, and lasted until June 30th. 8 defendants were tried. Mary Surratt. Charged with conspiracy and harboring the conspirators. Lewis Powell. Charged with the attempted assassination of Secretary Seward. George Atzerodt. Charged with conspiracy to assassinate Vice President Johnson. David Harold. Charged with conspiracy and aiding Booth's escape. Samuel Arnold. Michael O'Loughlin, charged with conspiracy in the original kidnapping plot. Dr. Samuel Mudd charged with aiding Booth's escape by treating his broken leg. Edmund Spangler. A Ford's Theater stagehand charged with aiding Booth's escape. The trial was conducted under intense public pressure for swift justice and revenge. The evidence against the conspirators varied widely, with some clearly guilty of serious crimes, while others appeared to have played minor roles or been caught up in events beyond their understanding. On June 30th, 1865, the military tribunal announced its verdicts. Mary Surratt. Asterisk, asterisk, Lewis. Powell, asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. George Atzerodt, asterisk, asterisk. And asterisk, asterisk. David Harold, asterisk, asterisk, were sentenced to death by hanging. Asterisk, asterisk, Samuel Arnold. Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Michael O'Loughlin, and asterisk, asterisk. Dr. Samuel Mudd, asterisk, asterisk, were sentenced to life in prison. Asterisk, asterisk, Edmund Spangler. Asterisk, asterisk, was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The death sentences were particularly controversial, especially that of Mary Surratt, who became the first woman executed by the federal government. Many people believed that her role in the conspiracy was minimal and that she was being punished primarily for her son's activities and for allowing the conspirators to meet at her boarding house. The executions were carried out on July 7, 1865, at the Washington Arsenal. Thousands of spectators gathered to witness the hangings, which were photographed and widely distributed. The 4 condemned conspirators were hanged simultaneously from a single gallows in what became one of the most famous execution photographs in American history. The Lincoln assassination and its aftermath generated numerous controversies that have persisted for more than 150 years. Asterisk, asterisk, military versus civilian justice. Asterisk, asterisk. The decision to try the conspirators before a military tribunal rather than in civilian courts was widely criticized as unconstitutional, especially after the war had effectively ended. Asterisk, asterisk, Mary Surratt's guilt, asterisk, asterisk. Questions persist about whether Mary Surratt deserved the death penalty for her role in the conspiracy. Some historians argue that she was primarily guilty of poor judgment in allowing the conspirators to meet at her boarding house, while others contend that she was an active participant in the plot. Asterisk, asterisk, Dr. Mudd's knowledge, asterisk, asterisk. The extent of Dr. Samuel Mudd's knowledge about Booth's identity and the assassination remains debated. Mudd maintained that he simply treated an injured man without knowing who he was, but evidence suggests he may have known more than he admitted. Asterisk, asterisk, Confederate government involvement. Asterisk, asterisk, some theories have suggested that the Confederate government in Richmond was involved in the assassination plot, but no credible evidence has ever been found to support these claims. Booth's diary. Asterisk, asterisk. Booth kept a diary during his flight, which was found on his body after he was killed. However, several pages were missing when the diary was turned over to the War Department, leading to speculation about what information might have been suppressed. Lincoln's assassination had profound and lasting effects on how America protects its leaders. Asterisk, asterisk, Secret Service. Creation, asterisk, asterisk. The United States Secret Service was created in 1865, initially to combat counterfeiting, but it eventually became responsible for presidential protection. Asterisk, asterisk, increased security measures. Asterisk, asterisk, future presidents would be surrounded by much more elaborate security arrangements, fundamentally changing the relationship between American leaders and the public. Asterisk, asterisk, bodyguard. Protocols, asterisk, asterisk. The failure of Lincoln's bodyguard to remain at his post led to the development of much more rigorous protection protocols for high-ranking officials. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln came at a crucial moment in American history, just as the nation was beginning to heal from the wounds of civil war. Lincoln's death transformed him from a controversial wartime president into a martyred saint of American democracy. The funeral arrangements for Lincoln were elaborate and unprecedented. His body lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda, where thousands of mourners paid their respects. The funeral train that carried Lincoln's body back to Springfield, Illinois, for burial stopped in cities along the route, allowing millions of Americans to mourn their fallen leader. Lincoln's assassination also had significant political consequences. Vice President Andrew Johnson, who assumed the presidency, lacked Lincoln's political skills and moral authority. His conflicts with Congress over Reconstruction policies led to his impeachment and contributed to a much harsher approach to the defeated South than Lincoln might have pursued. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln stands as one of the most significant crimes in American history for several reasons. Asterisk, asterisk, first presidential assassination, asterisk, asterisk. Lincoln's murder established the tragic precedent that American presidents were vulnerable to political violence, fundamentally changing how the nation viewed the security of its leaders. Asterisk, asterisk, Impact on Reconstruction. Asterisk, asterisk. Lincoln's death removed a leader who might have been able to bind up the nation's wounds more effectively, potentially altering the course of post-Civil War Reconstruction. Asterisk, asterisk. Symbol of martyrdom. Asterisk, asterisk. Lincoln's assassination transformed him into a Christ-like figure who had died for the cause of national unity and human freedom, cementing his place as America's greatest president. Asterisk, asterisk. Demonstration of fanaticism. Asterisk, asterisk. Booth's actions showed how political fanaticism could drive individuals to extreme violence, a lesson that would prove relevant throughout American history. Over the decades, historians and amateur investigators have continued to examine the Lincoln assassination, using new technologies and methodologies to shed light on various aspects of the case. Asterisk, asterisk. Forensic analysis. Asterisk, asterisk. Modern medical analysis of Lincoln's wound has confirmed that he could not have survived the injury, regardless of the medical care available at the time. Asterisk, asterisk. Ballistics. Evidence. Asterisk, asterisk. Analysis of the derringer used by Booth in the bullet recovered from Lincoln's body has provided additional details about the shooting. Asterisk, asterisk. Document analysis. Asterisk, asterisk. Continued study of documents from the period has provided new insights into the conspiracy and the government's response to it. Asterisk, asterisk. Archaeological evidence. Asterisk, asterisk. Excavation at sites associated with the assassination, including Ford's Theater and the Surratt boarding house, has uncovered artifacts that illuminate the historical record. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln represents one of the darkest moments in American history, occurring just as the nation was emerging from its bloodiest conflict. The murder of the president who had preserved the Union and freed the slaves was a tragedy that affected not just the immediate victims, but the entire course of American development. John Wilkes Booth's belief that he was striking a blow for Southern independence and constitutional government proved to be tragically misguided. Instead of helping the South, his actions ensured that Reconstruction would be harsher and more vindictive than it might have been under Lincoln's leadership. Instead of being remembered as a patriotic hero, Booth became one of history's most reviled assassins. The conspiracy that killed Lincoln demonstrated both the power of fanaticism to drive individuals to extreme actions and the resilience of American democratic institutions. Despite the shock of losing their leader, the government continued to function, the Constitution was preserved, and the rule of law was maintained. The manhunt that followed the assassination showed the federal government's determination to bring the conspirators to justice, even as it raised questions about military justice and civil liberties that continue to be debated today. The trial and execution of the conspirators reflected both the desire for swift justice and the complications that arise when passion and politics intersect with legal proceedings. More than 150 years later, the Lincoln assassination continues to fascinate Americans and people around the world. It serves as a reminder of both the vulnerability of democratic leaders and the strength of democratic institutions, of both the power of individual actions to change history and the importance of protecting those who serve the public. The shots fired in Ford's Theater on that April evening in 1865 not only ended the life of America's greatest president, but also marked the beginning of the modern era of presidential security and the recognition that political violence poses an ongoing threat to democratic governance. Lincoln's assassination was both an ending and a beginning, the end of one president's remarkable life and the beginning of America's long struggle to protect its leaders while maintaining the openness and accessibility that democracy requires. In death, Abraham Lincoln achieved the immortality that had eluded him in life, becoming not just a president, but a symbol of American ideals and values. The man who had guided the nation through its greatest crisis became, through his assassination, an enduring reminder of the price that democracy sometimes pays for freedom and the eternal vigilance required to preserve it. Story 2. The Assassination of Huey Long, September 8, 1935. The marble corridors of the Louisiana state capitol were buzzing with activity on the evening of September 8, 1935, as legislators worked through the night on a series of bills that would further consolidate the power of the state's most controversial political figure. Senator Huey Pierce Long, Jr., known to supporters as the Kingfish and to enemies as a dangerous demagogue, strode through the building he had constructed as a monument to his political dominance over Louisiana. Within minutes, a single gunshot would end the life of one of America's most charismatic and divisive political leaders, launching decades of debate about whether his death was the result of a lone assassin or a broader conspiracy. At 9:20 p.m., as Long walked through the Capitol's first-floor corridor flanked by his ever-present bodyguards, a slight young man in a white suit approached from the opposite direction. Dr. Carl Austin Weiss Jr., a 29-year-old physician and son-in-law of a political enemy of Long, raised a small pistol and fired a single shot into Long's abdomen before being immediately cut down by a hail of bullets from Long's bodyguards. Long would linger for 2 days before dying on September 10th, becoming the only sitting U.S. senator ever assassinated and leaving behind a political legacy that would influence Louisiana politics for generations. To understand Huey Long's assassination, one must first understand the extraordinary political machine he had built and the intense hatred he had generated among Louisiana's established elites. Born in 1893 in the rural parish of Wynne, Long rose from poverty to become one of the most powerful political figures in American history through a combination of genuine populist appeal, ruthless political tactics, and an outsized personality that dominated every room he entered. Long's political career began in 1918 when he was elected to the Louisiana Railroad Commission at age 25, running on a platform of regulating the powerful oil and utility companies that had long exploited the state's resources while keeping its people in poverty. His early campaigns established the themes that would define his entire career: championing the common man against entrenched wealth and corporate power, promising to share the state's oil wealth with its citizens, and presenting himself as the only politician brave enough to challenge the established order. Elected governor of Louisiana in 1928 at age 34, Long embarked on an ambitious program of public works and social reforms that transformed the state while concentrating unprecedented power in his own hands. He built thousands of miles of paved roads, constructed modern hospitals and schools, expanded Louisiana State University into a major institution, and provided free textbooks to all school children. His programs were funded through heavy taxes on oil companies and corporations, making him beloved among poor Louisianans and despised by the business community. Long's methods were as controversial as his programs were popular. He packed state boards and commissions with loyalists, used state resources to reward supporters and punish enemies, and gradually eliminated checks and balances within Louisiana government. By the time he was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1930, while continuing to serve as governor until 1932, Long had created what critics called a virtual dictatorship over Louisiana. Long's national political ambitions became clear in 1934 when he launched his Share Our Wealth movement, proposing to confiscate large fortunes and redistribute them to provide every American family with a homestead, education, and annual income. The program, summarized in the slogan, "Every Man a King," attracted millions of followers nationwide and positioned Long as a potential challenger to President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1936 election. Long's populist message resonated powerfully during the Great Depression, when millions of Americans were suffering economic hardship while a small elite maintained enormous wealth. His radio broadcasts and speeches drew massive audiences, and Share Our Wealth clubs formed across the country. By 1935, Long claimed that his movement had over 7 million members, making him one of the most influential politicians in America. The prospect of a long presidential campaign terrified both Republicans and Democrats. Roosevelt's advisors warned that Long could potentially win enough votes to throw the 1936 election to the Republicans, while conservative Democrats feared that his radical economic proposals would destroy the party's credibility with business interests. Long's assassination would eliminate this threat, leading to persistent speculation about whether powerful interests had orchestrated his death. Long's authoritarian methods and populist appeals had earned him numerous powerful enemies by 1935. The state's traditional elite, oil company executives, bankers, lawyers, and old-line politicians, viewed him as a dangerous radical who threatened their economic interests and political influence. Many had been targeted by Long's tax policies, investigations, and political vendettas, creating a climate of intense personal animosity. Among Long's most bitter enemies were the political families he had displaced from power, including the influential Standard Oil-aligned faction that had dominated Louisiana politics before Long's rise. These families had seen their political careers destroyed and their business interests threatened by Long's policies, creating powerful motives for revenge. Federal officials also viewed Long with suspicion and alarm. The Roosevelt administration had begun investigating Long's political organization for possible federal crimes, while FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover considered Long a potential threat to national security. IRS agents were examining Long's finances, and there were rumors that federal prosecutors were preparing criminal charges against him. Perhaps most significantly, Long had made personal enemies of many individuals through his vindictive political style. He routinely attacked opponents in crude and personal terms, used state power to investigate and harass critics, and showed no mercy to those who crossed him. This created a large pool of people with personal grievances against Long, any of whom might have been motivated to violence. The man who would kill Huey Long was an unlikely assassin. Dr. Carl Austin Weiss, Jr. was a 29-year-old physician who came from one of Louisiana's most respected medical families. His father, Dr. Carl Austin Weiss, Sr., was a prominent ear, nose, and throat specialist, while Carl Jr. had recently completed his medical training and established his own practice in Baton Rouge. Weiss was described by all who knew him as a gentle, scholarly man who showed no previous signs of violence or political extremism. He was married to Yvonne Pavey, daughter of Judge Benjamin Pavey, and the couple had a young son. Weiss was known for his dedication to his patients and his interest in classical music and literature, hardly the profile of a political assassin. However, the Weiss and Pavey families had strong reasons to hate Huey Long. Judge Benjamin Pavey had been a political opponent of Long's and had been targeted for removal from office through Long's control of the state legislature. More inflammatory were rumors that Long was planning to spread false stories about the Pavey family having African-American ancestry, a devastating accusation in the racially segregated South of the 1930s. The exact nature of these rumors and their impact on Weiss remains a matter of historical debate. Some accounts suggest that Long was planning to gerrymandering Judge Pavey out of office and destroy his political career through racist propaganda. Others claim that the racial rumors were more specific and personal, targeting Weiss's wife and child. Regardless of the details, it appears that Weiss believed Long was planning to destroy his family's reputation through false accusations. The Louisiana legislature was meeting in special session during the first week of September 1935 to pass a series of bills designed to further consolidate Long's political power. Among the measures being considered were bills to gerrymander political opponents out of office, increase Long's control over state employees, and strengthen his grip on Louisiana's electoral system. Long had spent the day of September 8th in a typical fashion, darting between his office in the Capitol, the legislative chambers, and meetings with supporters and staff. He was in an expansive mood, confident about the progress of his legislation, and excited about his national political prospects. Several witnesses later recalled that Long seemed unusually energetic and optimistic that evening, discussing his plans for the Share Our Wealth movement and his potential presidential campaign. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Long left the legislative chambers where he had been watching the proceedings and began walking through the Capitol's marble corridors toward the governor's office. He was accompanied by his usual contingent of bodyguards, Murphy Roden, Paul Vautier, Joe Messina, and Elliot Coleman, all armed state police officers who served as Long's personal protection detail. As Long walked down the first-floor corridor, talking animatedly with his bodyguards about the evening's legislative business, Dr. Carl Weiss emerged from behind a marble pillar near the governor's office. Weiss was dressed in a white linen suit and appeared calm and purposeful as he approached the group. The exact sequence of events that followed has been debated for decades, with conflicting accounts from witnesses and questions about what really happened in the few seconds that changed Louisiana history. According to the most widely accepted account, Dr. Weiss approached Long and his bodyguards from the front, walking toward them in the corridor. When he was within a few feet of Long, Weiss suddenly pulled a small pistol, later identified as a .32 caliber Belgian-made weapon, and fired a single shot into Long's abdomen. The shot struck Long just below the ribs on the right side, penetrating his abdomen and causing severe internal bleeding. Long immediately clutched his stomach and cried out, "I'm shot!" as he staggered backward against the marble wall. The bodyguards' response was immediate and devastating. All four men drew their weapons and opened fire on Weiss, who was standing only a few feet away. The volley of shots, estimated at between 30 and 60 rounds, struck Weiss throughout his body, killing him instantly. The young doctor's body was so riddled with bullets that it was barely recognizable by the time the shooting stopped. Long, meanwhile, remained conscious and was helped to a nearby office where he was examined by Dr. Arthur Vadrine, who happened to be in the building. The wound appeared serious but not necessarily fatal, and Long was quickly transported to Our Lady of the Lake Hospital for emergency surgery. Almost immediately after the shooting, questions arose about what had really happened in the Capitol corridor. The official account that Weiss had shot Long and been killed by the bodyguards was accepted by most authorities. But some witnesses and investigators raised troubling questions about the evidence. Most significantly, the ballistics evidence was problematic. When Weiss's gun was examined, investigators found that it had been fired only once, with one bullet missing from the chamber. However, no bullet was ever found that could be definitively linked to Weiss's weapon. The bullet that wounded Long was never recovered, and the trajectory of his wound seemed inconsistent with a shot fired from Weiss's position. Some investigators and witnesses suggested an alternative scenario, that Weiss had approached Long with his hand in his pocket, perhaps intending to confront him verbally or strike him, and that the bodyguards had mistaken this gesture as a threat and opened fire. In this version, Long was wounded not by Weiss's shot, but by a ricochet or wild shot from one of his own bodyguards during the fusillade that killed Weiss. This theory was supported by the fact that Weiss's hand showed powder burns consistent with having been shot while the gun was in his pocket or hand, but the pattern of burns was unusual for someone who had just fired a weapon. Additionally, several witnesses reported that they heard the bodyguard's shots before they heard Weiss's alleged shot, though the rapid sequence of events made such testimony unreliable. Regardless of who fired the shot that wounded him, Huey Long's condition deteriorated rapidly after he arrived at Our Lady of the Lake Hospital. The bullet had perforated his colon and caused severe internal bleeding, requiring immediate surgery to save his life. Dr. Arthur Vadrine led the surgical team, but the operation was complicated by several factors. The hospital lacked adequate blood supplies for transfusions. The surgical facilities were not equipped for such a complex procedure, and Long's condition was worse than initially thought. More controversially, some medical experts later suggested that the surgical team made critical errors that contributed to Long's death. Long remained conscious for much of the time following his surgery, and his comments during his final days have become part of Louisiana political legend. He reportedly told associates, "I have so much to do," and expressed regret that his political work was unfinished. He also made arrangements for his political organization to continue operating after his death, demonstrating his concern for maintaining his political machine. On the morning of September 10, 1935, Long's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. He developed peritonitis, a serious infection of the abdominal cavity, and went into shock. Despite the efforts of his medical team, Long died at 4:06 a.m. at age 42, just 31 hours after being shot. The investigation into Long's assassination was complicated by the political chaos that followed his death and the conflicting interests of various parties involved. Louisiana authorities, controlled by Long's political machine, had little incentive to uncover facts that might embarrass the organization or raise questions about the bodyguards' actions. The autopsy performed on Long's body was limited and failed to resolve key questions about the shooting. The examining physicians confirmed that Long had died from complications related to the gunshot wound, but they did not thoroughly investigate the trajectory of the bullet or attempt to determine conclusively whether it had come from Weiss's gun or another source. More problematically, no thorough autopsy was performed on Weiss's body, despite the unusual circumstances of his death. The massive number of gunshot wounds made it difficult to determine the sequence of shots or whether Weiss had been killed by the first shots fired or had remained alive long enough to fire his own weapon. The physical evidence from the crime scene was also inadequately preserved and analyzed. The Capitol corridor was quickly cleaned up, destroying potential evidence about bullet trajectories and blood spatter patterns. Weiss's gun was examined, but not with the sophisticated ballistics techniques that might have resolved questions about whether it had been fired and when. Long's death created a political earthquake in Louisiana and had significant implications for national politics. His death eliminated the most serious potential challenger to Franklin Roosevelt's re-election in 1936 and removed a powerful voice for economic populism from American politics. In Louisiana, Long's political machine initially held together under the leadership of his associates, including his brother Earl Long, who would later become governor himself. The organization continued to dominate state politics for decades, though it never again achieved the level of personal control that Huey Long had exercised. The Share Our Wealth movement collapsed almost immediately after Long's death, demonstrating how dependent it had been on his personal charisma and leadership. Other populist politicians attempted to inherit Long's mantle, but none achieved his level of national influence or political success. Long's assassination also had implications for political security and the protection of public officials. The ease with which Weiss had been able to approach Long in the state capitol, despite the presence of bodyguards, highlighted the vulnerability of political leaders and contributed to increased security measures for high-profile politicians. The circumstances surrounding Long's assassination have generated numerous conspiracy theories and alternative explanations over the decades. Some of these theories focus on the possibility that Weiss was part of a larger conspiracy involving Long's political enemies, while others suggest that Long was actually killed by his own bodyguards, either accidentally or as part of a plot against him. The business conspiracy theory. Some investigators have suggested that Long's assassination was orchestrated by business interests threatened by his populist policies and national political ambitions. This theory points to the fact that Long had made powerful enemies among oil companies, banks, and other corporations, any of whom might have benefited from his death. However, no credible evidence has ever been found to support the existence of such a conspiracy. The federal government. Theory. Another theory suggests that federal authorities were involved in Long's assassination, either directly or indirectly. Proponents of this theory note that the Roosevelt administration viewed Long as a threat to national stability and that federal agencies were investigating his organization. However, like the business conspiracy theory, this explanation lacks credible evidence and relies mainly on speculation about government motives. The accidental death theory. Perhaps the most plausible alternative explanation is that Long was accidentally shot by one of his own bodyguards during the confrontation with Weiss. This theory is supported by the ballistics evidence and witness testimony, but it has never been definitively proven. If true, it would mean that Weiss's apparent assassination attempt actually failed, and that Long died as a result of his bodyguard's overreaction to a perceived threat. The family honor theory. Some historians have suggested that Weiss's motive was purely personal, related to Long's attacks on his family, rather than any broader political conspiracy. This theory portrays Weiss as a man driven to violence by threats to his family's honor and reputation, acting alone without any outside encouragement or support. The Weiss family has consistently maintained that Carl Weiss was not a political assassin, but rather a gentle man who was driven to desperation by Long's threats against his family. According to this account, Weiss may have gone to the Capitol to confront Long verbally about the planned attacks on Judge Pavey, but had no intention of committing violence. Family members have suggested that Weiss may not have even been carrying a gun when he approached Long, or that if he was armed, it was for self-protection rather than assassination. They point to Weiss's character and background as evidence that he was incapable of premeditated murder. Some family members have also suggested that the gun found with Weiss's body may have been planted there by Long's bodyguards to justify their killing of an unarmed man. However, this claim is not supported by credible evidence and seems inconsistent with the rapid sequence of events during the shooting. Modern forensic experts who have examined the evidence from Long's assassination have reached mixed conclusions about what really happened. The ballistics evidence remains inconclusive, with no definitive proof that Weiss fired the shot that wounded Long. Some experts have noted that the wound Long sustained was inconsistent with a shot fired from close range, suggesting that he may have been hit by a ricochet or a shot fired from a greater distance. Others have pointed out that the lack of a recovered bullet makes it impossible to determine conclusively which gun fired the fatal shot. Medical experts have also questioned whether Long's death was inevitable given his wound, or whether better medical care might have saved his life. Some have suggested that the surgical team made errors that contributed to Long's death, while others argue that the wound was too severe for the medical technology of the 1930s to treat successfully. Huey Long's assassination has had a lasting impact on American culture and politics, inspiring numerous books, movies, and academic studies. Long's life and death have been portrayed in works ranging from Robert Penn Warren's novel All the King's Men to Ken Burns's documentary series on Long's political career. The assassination has also become part of Louisiana political mythology, with different factions interpreting the events to support their own political narratives. Long's supporters have portrayed him as a martyr who died fighting for the common people against entrenched interests, while his opponents have emphasized his authoritarian methods and the violence that surrounded his political career. The case has also influenced discussions about political violence in America and the protection of public officials. Long's death demonstrated the vulnerability of even heavily guarded politicians and contributed to the development of more sophisticated security measures for political leaders. Modern historians have generally adopted a more nuanced view of both Huey Long and his assassination than was common in the immediate aftermath of his death. While acknowledging Long's authoritarian methods and divisive rhetoric, many scholars have recognized his genuine achievements in improving conditions for Louisiana's poor and his influence on later populist movements. Similarly, the assessment of Dr. Carl Weiss has evolved over time. While early accounts portrayed him as either a heroic patriot who eliminated a dangerous demagogue or a crazed assassin who murdered a popular leader, more recent analyses have emphasized the personal and family pressures that may have driven him to violence. The question of whether Weiss actually shot Long remains unresolved, but most historians now acknowledge that the evidence is ambiguous and that alternative explanations for Long's death are at least plausible. This uncertainty has made the Long assassination one of the most debated political murders in American history. The assassination of Huey Long offers several important lessons about American politics and the dangers of political extremism. Long's career demonstrated both the appeal of populist politics during times of economic distress and the risks associated with concentrating too much power in the hands of a single individual. Long's death also illustrated the potential consequences of the bitter personal animosities that can develop in politics. Whether Weiss was motivated by political ideology, personal grievances, or family honor, his actions were ultimately the result of the climate of hatred and polarization that Long's political methods had created. The case also highlights the importance of thorough criminal investigations and the dangers of allowing political considerations to interfere with the pursuit of truth. The inadequate investigation of Long's assassination has left fundamental questions unanswered and has contributed to decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. The assassination of Huey Long remains one of the most controversial and mysterious political murders in American history. While the basic facts are clear, Long was shot in the Louisiana state capitol on September 8, 1935, and died 2 days later. Fundamental questions about the shooting remain unanswered more than 8 decades later. The case exemplifies the dangers of political polarization and the potential for personal grievances to escalate into violence. Whether Carl Weiss was a lone assassin driven by family honor, a member of a broader conspiracy against Long, or an innocent man who was killed by trigger-happy bodyguards, his actions, or alleged actions, eliminated one of the most influential political figures of the 1930s. Long's death changed the course of American political history, eliminating a potential challenger to Franklin Roosevelt and removing a powerful voice for economic populism from the national stage. It also demonstrated the vulnerability of political leaders and contributed to the development of more sophisticated security measures for public officials. The mystery surrounding Long's assassination continues to fascinate historians, political scientists, and the general public. The case serves as a reminder of the importance of preserving evidence, conducting thorough investigations, and seeking truth even when it may be politically inconvenient. Perhaps most importantly, the Long assassination illustrates the fragility of democratic institutions and the need for political leaders to exercise restraint and responsibility in their rhetoric and actions. Long's authoritarian methods and divisive politics created the conditions that led to his death, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked political power and the importance of maintaining democratic norms and institutions. The shots fired in the Louisiana state capitol on that September evening in 1935 not only ended the life of the Kingfish, but also marked the end of one of the most extraordinary political careers in American history. Whether those shots were fired by a desperate father and husband protecting his family's honor, by a political assassin seeking to eliminate a dangerous demagogue, or by nervous bodyguards in a moment of confusion, they forever changed the political landscape of Louisiana and America. Story 3. The assassination of William McKinley, September 6, 1901. The Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, was designed to showcase American prosperity and progress at the dawn of the 20th century. On September 6, 1901, President William McKinley arrived at the Temple of Music Pavilion to greet the public in what should have been a routine ceremonial appearance. Instead, as he extended his hand to shake hands with well-wishers in a receiving line, two gunshots would ring out, mortally wounding the 25th President of the United States and ushering in the era of modern presidential security. The assassin was Leon Czolgosz, a 28-year-old unemployed mill worker from Detroit, whose radicalization by anarchist ideology had convinced him that killing McKinley would strike a blow against capitalist oppression. The assassination would not only end McKinley's life, but also propel Theodore Roosevelt into the presidency, fundamentally changing the direction of American politics and leading to unprecedented reforms in how the nation protected its leaders. William McKinley had been serving as president since 1897, leading the nation through a period of economic prosperity and international expansion that had made America a world power. The 58-year-old Ohio native had built his political career on support for high protective tariffs and sound money policies that appealed to business interests and industrial workers alike. McKinley's presidency had been marked by significant achievements that had boosted his popularity and established America as a major player on the world stage. The Spanish-American War of 1898 had been a quick and decisive victory that resulted in American acquisition of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, while also establishing American influence over Cuba. The war had been tremendously popular with the American public and had given McKinley a reputation as a strong leader capable of expanding American power and influence. Domestically, McKinley presided over a period of economic growth and prosperity that had helped heal the wounds of the severe depression of the 1890s. His support for the gold standard had restored confidence in American currency, while his tariff policies had protected American industries and provided jobs for American workers. By 1901, unemployment was low, wages were rising, and the country seemed to be entering a new era of prosperity and progress. However, McKinley's policies had also created enemies among those who viewed him as a tool of big business and corporate interests. Labor radicals, anarchists, and other critics saw him as a symbol of capitalist oppression who cared more about profits than people. His support for American imperialism in the Philippines had also generated opposition from those who viewed the acquisition of overseas territories as a betrayal of American democratic principles. The assassination of President McKinley occurred during a period of increased anarchist violence that had swept across Europe and America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Anarchists believed that existing governments were illegitimate institutions that oppressed the working class, and that violence against political leaders was justified as a means of bringing about social revolution. The anarchist movement had gained momentum following several high-profile assassinations in Europe. In 1894, French President Sadi Carnot had been stabbed to death by an Italian anarchist. In 1897, Spanish Prime Minister Antonio Canovas had been shot by an anarchist. And in 1898, Empress Elizabeth of Austria had been stabbed to death in Geneva. Most significantly for American anarchists, King Umberto I of Italy had been assassinated in 1900 by an Italian-American anarchist who had returned to Italy from the United States specifically to commit the murder. These assassinations had inspired anarchists around the world and had created a climate of fear among political leaders about the threat posed by radical violence. American authorities were aware of the anarchist movement and had begun taking some precautions to protect government officials, though the level of security provided to the president remained minimal by modern standards. The anarchist movement in America was centered in immigrant communities, particularly among Italian and Eastern European immigrants, who had been exposed to radical political ideas in their home countries. These communities provided both ideological support and practical assistance to individuals considering violent action against government officials. Leon Frank Czolgosz was born in 1873 to Polish immigrant parents in Alpena, Michigan, and grew up in a working-class family that struggled with poverty and economic instability. His early life was marked by the kind of economic hardship and social displacement that often characterized the immigrant experience in industrial America. Czolgosz worked in various factories and mills throughout the Midwest, experiencing firsthand the harsh working conditions, low wages, and economic insecurity that characterized industrial labor at the time. He was employed at the Newburgh wire mills in Cleveland, Ohio, where he earned a reputation as a competent worker, though he was also known for his quiet, withdrawn personality and his growing interest in radical political ideas. The economic depression of the 1890s had a profound impact on Czolgosz, as it did on many American workers. He experienced periods of unemployment and saw his family struggle with financial hardship, experiences that contributed to his growing resentment toward the capitalist system and the politicians who supported it. Czolgosz's political radicalization accelerated after he began reading anarchist literature and attending meetings of anarchist groups in Cleveland. He was particularly influenced by the writings of Emma Goldman, the famous anarchist speaker and writer, who advocated for revolutionary violence against capitalist oppression. Czolgosz attended a lecture by Goldman in Cleveland in 1901 and was reportedly deeply moved by her message about the need for violent action against the ruling class. By 1901, Czolgosz had become convinced that assassinating President McKinley would be a meaningful act of revolutionary violence that would inspire other workers to rise up against their oppressors. He began planning the assassination several weeks before the Pan American Exposition, conducting research on McKinley's schedule and movements, and acquiring the weapon he would use to carry out the attack. The Pan American Exposition was designed to celebrate American progress and prosperity while showcasing the nation's growing influence in the Western Hemisphere. The fair, which ran from May 1st through November 2nd, 1901, featured elaborate pavilions, technological displays, and cultural attractions that drew millions of visitors to Buffalo. President McKinley's visit to the exposition was part of a broader tour designed to demonstrate his popularity and promote his administration's achievements. The president was scheduled to deliver a major speech on September 5th, followed by a public reception at the Temple of Music on September 6th, where he would shake hands with members of the public. The Temple of Music was one of the exposition's most impressive structures, a large domed building designed to showcase musical performances and cultural events. For McKinley's reception, the building was decorated with American flags and bunting, and a receiving line was arranged so that visitors could meet and shake hands with the president. Security arrangements for McKinley's visit were typical for the era, minimal by modern standards, but considered adequate at the time. The president was accompanied by several Secret Service agents, including George Foster and Samuel Ireland, as well as local police officers and exposition security personnel. However, there were no metal detectors, bag searches, or other security measures that would be considered essential today. The decision to hold a public reception where anyone could approach the president and shake his hand reflected the more open and accessible nature of the presidency in 1901. Previous presidents had regularly held such events, and there had been no successful assassination attempts on American presidents since Lincoln's murder in 1865, leading many to believe that the threat to presidential safety was minimal. September 6, 1901, began as a beautiful early fall day in Buffalo, with clear skies and comfortable temperatures that promised perfect weather for the president's public reception. McKinley was in an excellent mood, having delivered a well-received speech the previous day and looking forward to meeting with the public. The president spent the morning touring exposition exhibits and meeting with local officials before returning to his hotel for lunch and a brief rest. He was scheduled to arrive at the Temple of Music at 4 p.m. for the public reception, which was expected to last about 10 minutes and allow approximately 50 people to meet the president. Leon Czolgosz had arrived at the exposition earlier in the day and had spent time observing the Temple of Music and the security arrangements for the president's visit. He had concealed a .32 caliber Iver Johnson revolver under a handkerchief wrapped around his right hand, making it appear as though he had injured his hand and was protecting it with a bandage. The receiving line began forming well before the president's scheduled arrival, with hundreds of people hoping to meet McKinley despite the limited time available for the reception. Czolgosz positioned himself in the line and waited patiently as it moved slowly toward the president. At approximately 4:05 p.m., President McKinley took his position in the receiving line, flanked by Secret Service agents and other officials. He began shaking hands with visitors, exchanging pleasantries and brief conversations with those who approached him. The president appeared relaxed and was enjoying the opportunity to meet with members of the public. At approximately 4:07 p.m., as the receiving line continued to move forward, Leon Czolgosz approached President McKinley. The president extended his hand to greet what appeared to be another well-wisher, not noticing anything unusual about the young man with the bandaged hand. Instead of extending his hand to shake the president's, Czolgosz pushed McKinley's hand aside and fired 2 shots from his concealed revolver. The first bullet struck McKinley in the chest, but was deflected by a button and caused only a superficial wound. The second bullet, fired almost immediately after the first, struck the president in the abdomen, penetrating deeply into his body and causing severe internal injuries. McKinley staggered backward from the impact of the shots but remained standing. Witnesses reported that he appeared more surprised than pained and initially seemed to believe that he had not been seriously injured. "I believe I am shot," he said calmly to those around him, while pressing his hand to his abdomen where the bullet had entered. The reaction of those present was immediate and chaotic. Secret Service agent George Foster tackled Czolgosz before he could fire a third shot, while other agents and bystanders joined in subduing the assassin. The crowd in the Temple of Music began screaming and rushing toward the exits, creating a scene of panic and confusion. President McKinley, despite being mortally wounded, demonstrated remarkable composure and concern for others. As the crowd surged around the fallen Czolgosz, McKinley reportedly said, "Don't let them hurt him," showing mercy toward his assassin even in his moment of greatest peril. This act of grace would be remembered as one of the most remarkable aspects of the tragic event. Medical attention was quickly summoned for the wounded president, and he was transported to the Exposition's emergency hospital, a small facility that was not equipped to handle such a serious medical emergency. Dr. Matthew Mann, a gynecologist who happened to be at the Exposition, was called to treat McKinley's wounds. The medical care McKinley received was hindered by several factors that would prove crucial to the ultimate outcome. The Exposition's hospital lacked adequate lighting and surgical equipment, making it difficult to properly examine and treat the president's wounds. More significantly, the second bullet had lodged deep in McKinley's abdomen, and the medical technology of 1901 was inadequate to locate and remove it safely. Dr. Mann performed surgery on McKinley in the inadequate conditions of the Exposition Hospital, managing to repair some of the damage caused by the bullet, but unable to locate and remove the projectile itself. The surgery appeared to be successful initially, and McKinley's condition seemed to stabilize, leading doctors and officials to express cautious optimism about his recovery. Leon Czolgosz, meanwhile, was immediately taken into custody by Buffalo police. He made no attempt to escape or resist arrest and seemed almost relieved to have been captured. When questioned about his motives, he expressed no regret for his actions and explained that he had shot McKinley because he was an enemy of the working people. For several days following the assassination attempt, President McKinley appeared to be recovering from his wounds. His doctors issued optimistic bulletins about his condition, and there was widespread belief that he would survive the attack and return to his presidential duties. McKinley was moved from the Exposition Hospital to the home of John Milburn, the Exposition's president, where he could receive better care and more comfortable accommodations. The president remained conscious and alert, speaking with his wife Ida and with government officials about both personal matters and affairs of state. However, McKinley's apparent recovery was deceptive. The bullet that had lodged in his abdomen had caused internal injuries that were not immediately apparent, and the medical technology of the time was insufficient to detect and treat these complications. Moreover, the risk of infection from gunshot wounds was enormous in the pre-antibiotic era, and even seemingly successful surgeries often led to fatal complications. By September 12, 6 days after the shooting, McKinley's condition began to deteriorate rapidly. He developed signs of gangrene and infection around the bullet wound, and his vital signs indicated that his body was failing to fight off the complications from his injuries. On September 14, 1901, 8 days after being shot, President William McKinley died from complications related to his gunshot wounds. His death was attributed to gangrene that had developed around the bullet wound, a common and often fatal complication of penetrating injuries in the era before modern antibiotics and surgical techniques. McKinley's final words were reported to be lines from his favorite hymn, "Nearer, my God, to thee." He died surrounded by his wife and close advisors, having faced his approaching death with the same grace and composure he had shown immediately after being shot. The president's death shocked the nation and the world, as many had believed he would recover from his wounds, based on the initial optimistic medical reports. The realization that America had lost another president to an assassin's bullet, coming just 36 years after Lincoln's murder, created a profound sense of vulnerability and loss throughout the country. Vice President Theodore Roosevelt, who had been vacationing in Vermont when McKinley was shot, rushed to Buffalo upon learning of the president's deteriorating condition. Roosevelt was sworn in as the 26th President of the United States on September 14, 1901, becoming at age 42 the youngest person ever to assume the presidency. Leon Czolgosz was quickly brought to trial for the assassination of President McKinley, with proceedings beginning on September 23, 1901, just 9 days after the president's death. The speed of the trial reflected both the overwhelming evidence of Czolgosz's guilt and the public demand for swift justice. The trial was held in Buffalo's City Hall, with Justice Truman White presiding. Czolgosz was represented by two court-appointed attorneys, Lauren Lewis and Robert Titus, who faced the difficult task of defending a client who had committed his crime in front of dozens of witnesses and who showed no remorse for his actions. The prosecution's case was straightforward and overwhelming. Numerous witnesses testified that they had seen Czolgosz shoot the president, and physical evidence, including the murder weapon, clearly linked him to the crime. Medical testimony established that McKinley had died as a direct result of the gunshot wounds inflicted by Czolgosz. Czolgosz himself provided little assistance to his defense attorneys. He refused to cooperate with efforts to develop a defense strategy and showed no interest in mounting an insanity plea or any other legal defense. When asked about his motives, he continued to express anarchist views and maintained that he had been justified in killing McKinley. The defense attorneys attempted to argue that Czolgosz was mentally ill and therefore not responsible for his actions, but they were unable to present compelling evidence to support this claim. Czolgosz appeared rational and coherent throughout the proceedings, and his careful planning of the assassination suggested premeditation rather than mental instability. On September 24, 1901, after deliberating for less than 1 hour, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree. The speed of the deliberation reflected both the overwhelming evidence of Czolgosz's guilt and the emotional atmosphere surrounding the trial. Justice White sentenced Czolgosz to death in the electric chair, a relatively new method of execution that had been adopted by New York State in 1890. The sentence was to be carried out at Auburn State Prison, and Czolgosz was transferred there immediately following his sentencing. Czolgosz spent his final weeks in prison showing the same lack of remorse he had demonstrated throughout his trial. He refused visits from clergy members and declined to make any statements expressing regret for his actions. When asked about his motives, he continued to maintain that he had killed McKinley for the good of the working class. On October 29, 1901, just 45 days after McKinley's death, Leon Czolgosz was executed in the electric chair at Auburn State Prison. His final words were reported to be, "I killed the president because he was the enemy of the good people, the good working people. I am not sorry for my crime." He was 28 years old. Following his execution, Czolgosz's body was buried in an unmarked grave within the prison grounds, and sulfuric acid was poured over his corpse and coffin to accelerate decomposition and prevent his grave from becoming a shrine for anarchist sympathizers. McKinley's assassination had immediate and lasting effects on how America protected its presidents and other high-ranking officials. The ease with which Czolgosz had been able to approach and shoot the president highlighted the inadequacy of existing security measures and led to significant reforms in presidential protection. Prior to McKinley's assassination, presidential security was minimal and largely informal. Presidents regularly appeared in public without significant protection, and events like the reception at the Temple of Music were considered safe because they involved meeting with presumably friendly members of the public. The assassination led to the expansion and formalization of the Secret Service's role in presidential protection. While the Secret Service had been created in 1865 to combat counterfeiting, it began providing full-time protection for presidents following McKinley's death. This marked the beginning of the modern era of presidential security, with its emphasis on controlling access to the president and screening potential threats. The changes in security protocols fundamentally altered the relationship between American presidents and the public. The informal, accessible presidency of the 19th century, where citizens could relatively easily meet and speak with their president, was replaced by an increasingly isolated and protected office that reflected the realities of modern threats to political leaders. Perhaps the most significant consequence of McKinley's assassination was the elevation of Theodore Roosevelt to the presidency. Roosevelt, who had been relegated to the largely ceremonial role of vice president, suddenly found himself in position to implement his progressive political agenda. Roosevelt's presidency would mark a dramatic shift in American politics and policy. Unlike the business-friendly McKinley, Roosevelt was a trustbuster who believed in using government power to regulate big business and protect consumers. His square deal policies would expand federal regulation of industry, establish new national parks and conservation programs, and strengthen America's role in international affairs. The contrast between McKinley and Roosevelt was stark in almost every respect. Where McKinley was cautious and conservative, Roosevelt was bold and progressive. Where McKinley deferred to business interests, Roosevelt challenged corporate power. Where McKinley preferred quiet diplomacy, Roosevelt advocated speaking softly while carrying a big stick. It is impossible to know how American history might have been different if McKinley had survived the assassination attempt and served out his second term. Roosevelt's progressive policies and dynamic leadership style fundamentally changed the role of the federal government and established precedents that would influence American politics for decades to come. McKinley's assassination led to a severe crackdown on anarchist movements throughout the United States. Public outrage over the president's murder created support for harsh measures against individuals and organizations associated with anarchist ideology, regardless of whether they had been involved in planning or supporting Czolgosz's attack. Emma Goldman, whose writings and speeches had influenced Czolgosz, was arrested and questioned extensively about her possible role in the assassination conspiracy. Although no evidence was found linking her directly to Czolgosz's plans, she was held for several weeks and subjected to intense scrutiny from law enforcement agencies. The assassination also led to new federal legislation targeting anarchists and other radical political movements. The Immigration Act of 1903 specifically excluded anarchists from entry into the United States and provided for the deportation of foreign-born anarchists who were already in the country. This represented one of the first federal laws targeting specific political beliefs rather than criminal actions. State and local authorities also increased their surveillance and suppression of anarchist groups, using McKinley's assassination as justification for raids, arrests, and other actions against suspected radicals. Many innocent individuals were caught up in this crackdown, as authorities often made little distinction between anarchists, socialists, and other critics of capitalism. The medical treatment that President McKinley received following his shooting has been the subject of considerable debate among historians and medical experts. Some have argued that McKinley might have survived his wounds if he had received better medical care, while others contend that his injuries were inevitably fatal given the medical technology available in 1901. The primary criticism of McKinley's medical treatment focuses on the decision to operate on him at the exposition's inadequate hospital rather than transporting him to a better-equipped facility. The poor lighting and limited surgical instruments available at the exposition hospital made it difficult to properly assess and treat McKinley's internal injuries. Additionally, some medical historians have argued that the failure to locate and remove the bullet that lodged in McKinley's abdomen contributed to the development of the gangrene that ultimately killed him. However, others point out that abdominal surgery was extremely dangerous in 1901, and that attempting to locate and remove the bullet might have been more likely to kill McKinley than save him. The development of X-ray technology, which had been invented just a few years before McKinley's shooting, might have helped doctors locate the bullet and assess the extent of his internal injuries. However, X-ray equipment was not readily available at the exposition, and many doctors were still unfamiliar with the new technology. McKinley's assassination generated significant international attention and sympathy, particularly among the leaders of other nations who recognize their own vulnerability to anarchist violence. The assassination was widely condemned by foreign governments, and many world leaders sent messages of condolence to the American people. The international anarchist movement's celebration of McKinley's death created diplomatic tensions and increased cooperation among nations in combating anarchist activities. European governments shared intelligence about anarchist movements with American authorities and increased their own security measures to protect political leaders. The assassination also highlighted America's emergence as a world power, as the death of an American president was now considered a matter of international significance. This represented a significant change from the 19th century, when American presidents were relatively obscure figures on the world stage. The assassination of William McKinley marked a turning point in American political history, ending the presidency of a conservative Republican who had presided over economic prosperity and imperial expansion while launching the progressive presidency of Theodore Roosevelt. McKinley's death also marked the end of an era of informal, accessible presidential leadership and the beginning of the modern security state that surrounds American presidents. The changes in security protocols that followed his assassination fundamentally altered the relationship between presidents and the public, creating the isolated, heavily protected presidency that Americans know today. The assassination demonstrated the international nature of anarchist violence and the threat it posed to political stability around the world. McKinley's death was part of a wave of anarchist assassinations that struck political leaders across Europe and America, highlighting the global reach of radical political movements. Perhaps most significantly, McKinley's assassination brought Theodore Roosevelt to power at a crucial moment in American history. Roosevelt's progressive policies and dynamic leadership style would transform American government and society, establishing precedents for federal regulation of business, conservation of natural resources, and international activism that would influence American politics for decades to come. The assassination of President William McKinley on September 6, 1901, represents one of the most consequential political murders in American history. The shooting at the Pan American Exposition not only ended the life of a popular president, but also fundamentally changed American politics, security practices, and the relationship between government and citizens. Leon Czolgosz's decision to kill McKinley was motivated by anarchist ideology and personal grievances against the capitalist system that he believed McKinley represented. His actions demonstrated the power of radical political movements to influence events through violence, while also highlighting the vulnerability of democratic leaders to attack by determined individuals. The medical aspects of McKinley's death illustrate the limitations of early 20th century medicine and surgery, while raising questions about whether better medical care might have saved the president's life. The 8-day period between the shooting and McKinley's death created false hope for his recovery and made his eventual death even more shocking to the American public. The swift trial and execution of Czolgosz reflected both the overwhelming evidence of his guilt and the public demand for justice in the wake of the president's murder. The brevity of the legal proceedings, while appropriate given the circumstances, also demonstrated the emotional atmosphere that surrounded the case and the difficulty of ensuring fair treatment for politically motivated criminals. The transformation of Theodore Roosevelt from a marginalized vice president into one of America's most influential presidents represents perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of McKinley's assassination. Roosevelt's progressive policies and international activism fundamentally changed American government and established the United States as a major world power. The security changes that followed McKinley's assassination created the foundation for modern presidential protection, ending the era when American presidents could move freely among the public without significant security precautions. This transformation reflected both the realities of modern threats to political leaders and the loss of innocence that accompanied America's emergence as a world power. Today, the assassination of William McKinley serves as a reminder of the vulnerability of democratic institutions to violent attack and the importance of protecting political leaders without completely isolating them from the people they serve. The balance between security and accessibility remains one of the ongoing challenges of democratic governance, a challenge that was first seriously confronted in the aftermath of the shots fired at the Temple of Music on that September day in 1901. Story 4. The attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, March 30th, 1981. At 2:27 p.m. on March 30th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan emerged from the Washington Hilton Hotel after delivering a speech to the AFL-CIO's Building and Construction Trades Department. As he walked a short distance to his waiting limousine, waving to the small crowd of onlookers and reporters gathered behind rope lines, few could have anticipated that within seconds, 6 gunshots would ring out, wounding the president and 3 others in an attack that would test the strength of American institutions and reveal the disturbing psychology of a would-be assassin obsessed with a Hollywood actress. The shooter was John Hinckley Jr., a 25-year-old drifter from a wealthy Texas family whose descent into mental illness and obsession with actress Jodie Foster had convinced him that assassinating the president would somehow win her love and attention. The attack, captured on film and broadcast repeatedly around the world, would come within inches of killing Reagan and would expose critical gaps in presidential security while demonstrating the resilience of both the president and the American system of government. Ronald Wilson Reagan had been president for just 69 days when John Hinckley attempted to kill him, making him one of the newest presidents ever to face an assassination attempt. The 70-year-old former Hollywood actor and California governor had won a decisive victory over incumbent Jimmy Carter in November 1980, promising to restore American strength and prosperity after years of economic stagnation and international humiliation. Reagan's presidency had begun with considerable fanfare and optimism. His inaugural address had declared that government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem, and he had immediately begun implementing conservative policies designed to reduce taxes, cut government spending, and strengthen America's military. His folksy charm and communication skills had earned him the nickname the Great Communicator, and his approval ratings remained strong despite the challenges facing the nation. The president's appearance at the Washington Hilton on March 30th was part of his ongoing effort to build support for his economic program among labor unions, a traditionally Democratic constituency. Reagan's speech had focused on his administration's commitment to creating jobs and controlling inflation, and he had received a respectful, if not enthusiastic, reception from the audience. The choice of the Washington Hilton as a venue was routine for presidential appearances. The hotel, located on Connecticut Avenue in Northwest Washington, was a popular site for political events and had hosted numerous presidents and other dignitaries without incident. The hotel's proximity to the White House and its secure facilities made it an attractive location for official functions. John Warnock Hinckley Jr. was born on May 29, 1955, in Ardmore, Oklahoma, the youngest of 3 children in an affluent family. His father, John Hinckley Sr., was a successful oil executive who had built a prosperous business and provided his family with a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle. By all external appearances, young John Hinckley had every advantage and opportunity for success. However, beneath the surface of privilege and prosperity, Hinckley struggled with depression, social isolation, and an inability to establish meaningful relationships or find direction in his life. He drifted through college, dropping out of Texas Tech University, and spent years living at home with his parents while pursuing vague dreams of becoming a musician or writer. Hinckley's psychological problems deepened in the late 1970s when he became obsessed with the 1976 film Taxi Driver, starring Robert De Niro as Travis Bickle, a lonely, disturbed taxi driver who attempts to assassinate a presidential candidate. Hinckley watched the film repeatedly, eventually seeing it more than 15 times, and began to identify strongly with the De Niro character. More significantly, Hinckley developed an intense obsession with Jodie Foster, the young actress who played a teenage prostitute in Taxi Driver. Foster's character in the film becomes the object of Bickle's misguided attempt at rescue, and Hinckley began to conflate fantasy with reality, believing that he could win Foster's attention and love by emulating the actions of the fictional Travis Bickle. Hinckley's obsession with Foster intensified when she enrolled at Yale University in 1980. He began stalking her, making numerous trips to New Haven to try to contact her, leaving letters and poems under her door, and making phone calls to her dormitory. Foster, understandably frightened by this harassment, never responded to Hinckley's overtures and eventually alerted campus security about his behavior. By early 1981, Hinckley had become increasingly desperate and delusional about his prospects for winning Foster's attention. His unsuccessful attempts to contact her at Yale had left him feeling rejected and hopeless, and he began to believe that only a dramatic, historic act would demonstrate the depth of his love and finally capture her interest. Hinckley's choice of assassination as a means of impressing Foster was directly inspired by Taxi Driver, in which the Travis Bickle character attempts to kill a presidential candidate after his efforts to rescue Foster's character fail. In Hinckley's disturbed mind, the fictional plot of the movie became a blueprint for real-world action. The decision to target President Reagan specifically appears to have been largely opportunistic rather than based on any strong political convictions. Hinckley had briefly considered assassinating President Carter in 1980, but had never acted on these thoughts. Reagan became his target simply because he was the current president and therefore the most prominent political figure available. Hinckley's preparation for the assassination attempt was relatively minimal, reflecting both his amateur status and his underlying mental instability. He purchased a .22 caliber Rome RG-14 revolver from Rocky's pawn shop in Dallas, Texas, on October 13, 1980, for $47. The choice of a small caliber weapon would prove crucial to Reagan's survival, as the .22 caliber bullets lacked the stopping power that might have made the attack more deadly. In the weeks leading up to the assassination attempt, Hinckley wrote several letters to Jodie Foster explaining his intentions and professing his love for her. One letter, written on the morning of March 30th and left in his hotel room, revealed the depth of his delusion. "By sacrificing my freedom and possibly my life, I hope to change your mind about me. This letter is being written only an hour before I leave for the Hilton Hotel. Jodie, I'm asking you to please look into your heart and at least give me the chance with this historical deed to gain your respect and love." President Reagan's schedule on March 30th, 1981 was relatively light, consisting primarily of the speaking engagement at the Washington Hilton. The president had lunch at the White House before departing for the hotel at approximately 1:45 p.m. His motorcade arrived at the Hilton without incident, and Reagan delivered his speech to the labor audience without any apparent problems. The president's departure from the hotel was handled according to standard Secret Service protocols. Reagan exited through the hotel's VIP entrance onto T Street, where his armored limousine was waiting. The area had been secured by Secret Service agents, and a small crowd of reporters, hotel employees, and onlookers had gathered behind rope lines to watch the president's departure. John Hinckley had positioned himself among the group of onlookers, standing approximately 15 feet from where Reagan would pass on his way to the limousine. He had concealed his revolver in his jacket pocket and appeared calm as he waited for the president to emerge from the hotel. At 2:27 p.m., President Reagan exited the hotel and began walking toward his limousine, waving to the crowd and appearing relaxed and confident. He had nearly reached the car when Hinckley suddenly crouched into a combat stance, pulled out his revolver, and began firing rapidly. The attack lasted only 1.7 seconds, but in that brief time, Hinckley fired 6 shots in rapid succession. The bullets struck 4 people. President Reagan. Was hit by the 6th and final bullet, which ricocheted off the presidential limousine and struck him under his left arm, puncturing his lung and lodging near his heart. Press Secretary James Brady. Was struck in the head by the first bullet, suffering a devastating brain injury that would leave him permanently disabled. Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy. Was hit in the abdomen as he moved to shield the president with his body. Washington police officer Thomas Delahanty. Was struck in the neck as he stood guard near the president's limousine. The Secret Service's response to the attack was swift and professional, demonstrating the effectiveness of their training and protocols. Agent Jerry Parr immediately tackled President Reagan and shoved him into the limousine, while other agents subdued Hinckley and secured the scene. Initially, the Secret Service was not aware that President Reagan had been shot. The bullet that struck him had ricocheted off the armored limousine before hitting him, and the impact was not immediately apparent. Reagan himself was not initially aware of his wound, complaining only of chest pain that he attributed to Agent Parr's tackle. Agent Parr made the crucial decision to divert the presidential limousine to George Washington University Hospital, rather than returning to the White House as originally planned. This decision, made when Reagan began coughing up blood and his condition became apparent, almost certainly saved the president's life by getting him immediate medical attention. The scene outside the Hilton was chaotic in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. Press Secretary James Brady lay motionless on the sidewalk with a severe head wound, while Secret Service agents and police officers provided first aid to the other wounded victims. The area was quickly secured as a crime scene, and additional emergency personnel arrived to assist the wounded. John Hinckley was immediately apprehended by Secret Service agents and D.C. police officers. He made no attempt to escape and appeared almost relieved to have been captured. When asked why he had shot the president, he initially gave no coherent explanation, though he later revealed his obsession with Jodie Foster and his belief that the assassination attempt would win her attention. President Reagan arrived at George Washington University Hospital at 2:35 p.m., just 8 minutes after being shot. His condition was serious but not immediately recognized as life-threatening, as the small-caliber bullet had not created an obvious external wound, and Reagan remained conscious and alert. However, Reagan's condition deteriorated rapidly upon arrival at the hospital. He was having difficulty breathing due to a punctured lung, and internal bleeding from the bullet wound was causing his blood pressure to drop dangerously. The medical team, led by Dr. Joseph Giordano, quickly determined that emergency surgery was necessary to save the president's life. Reagan's behavior during this medical crisis became legendary and helped establish his reputation for grace under pressure. Despite being in severe pain and facing life-threatening injuries, he maintained his sense of humor and concern for others. When wheeled into the emergency room, he told the medical staff, "I hope you're all Republicans." When Dr. Giordano replied that they were all Democrats today, Reagan responded, "Well, I guess I'll have to trust you." To his wife Nancy, who had rushed to the hospital upon learning of the shooting, Reagan quoted boxer Jack Dempsey's famous line, "Honey, I forgot to duck." These moments of levity in the face of mortal danger endeared Reagan to the American public and demonstrated his remarkable composure under pressure. The surgery to remove the bullet from Reagan's chest lasted approximately 3 hours and was successful in stopping the internal bleeding and repairing the damage to his lung. The bullet had come within inches of Reagan's heart, and doctors later said that he might have died if medical treatment had been delayed much longer. While President Reagan recovered from his wounds, the other victims of Hinckley's attack faced more serious long-term consequences. James Brady. Reagan's press secretary suffered the most severe injuries in the attack. The bullet that struck him in the head caused massive brain damage and left him permanently disabled. Brady spent months in the hospital and underwent extensive rehabilitation, but he never fully recovered from his injuries. Despite his disabilities, Brady became a prominent advocate for gun control legislation and worked with his wife Sarah to promote what became known as the Brady Bill, requiring background checks for handgun purchases. Timothy McCarthy. The Secret Service agent who was shot while shielding the president made a full recovery from his abdominal wound and returned to duty. His heroic actions in protecting Reagan earned him widespread admiration and demonstrated the dedication of the Secret Service agents who risked their lives to protect the president. Thomas Delahanty. The D.C. police officer who was wounded in the neck also recovered from his injuries and returned to work, though he later retired on disability due to ongoing effects from his wound. The FBI's investigation into the assassination attempt was extensive and quickly established the basic facts of the case. Hinckley had acted alone, with no evidence of a broader conspiracy or assistance from others. His background was thoroughly examined, revealing his history of mental illness, his obsession with Jodie Foster, and his identification with the character from Taxi Driver. Investigators found Hinckley's hotel room at the Park Central Hotel in Washington, where they discovered several items that provided insight into his motives and mental state. Among the evidence were letters to Jodie Foster explaining his plan to assassinate the president, copies of the novel Catcher in the Rye, which had also been found with John Lennon's killer just 4 months earlier, and other materials related to his obsession with Foster. The investigation also examined how Hinckley had been able to get so close to the president with a loaded weapon. While the Secret Service had followed standard protocols for the event, The shooting raised questions about security procedures and led to improvements in presidential protection, including more thorough screening of crowds and enhanced coordination between different law enforcement agencies. One particularly troubling aspect of the investigation was the discovery that Hinckley had been arrested at Nashville Airport in October 1980 for carrying firearms while President Carter was visiting the city. However, this arrest had not been properly flagged in security databases, and Hinckley's name was not on any watch list that might have prevented him from getting close to President Reagan. John Hinckley's trial began on April 27, 1982, more than a year after the assassination attempt. The case was prosecuted in federal court in Washington, D.C., with Judge Barrington Parker presiding. The central issue at trial was not whether Hinckley had shot the president, that was clearly established by video evidence and eyewitness testimony, but whether he was legally insane at the time of the shooting. Hinckley's defense team, led by Vincent Fuller, argued that their client was suffering from severe mental illness that prevented him from understanding the wrongfulness of his actions. They presented extensive psychiatric evidence showing that Hinckley had been diagnosed with various mental disorders and had been receiving treatment for depression and other psychological problems. The defense strategy focused heavily on Hinckley's obsession with Jodie Foster and his identification with the Travis Bickle character from Taxi Driver. Psychiatric experts testified that Hinckley's grip on reality had become so tenuous that he believed shooting the president was a rational way to win Foster's love and attention. The prosecution, led by Roger Edelman, argued that while Hinckley might have been mentally ill, he was still legally responsible for his actions. They contended that his careful planning of the attack, his ability to function normally in the days leading up to the shooting, and his awareness of the consequences of his actions demonstrated that he understood right from wrong. The trial generated intense public interest in media coverage, both because of the prominence of the victim and because of the unusual circumstances surrounding the attack. Jodie Foster was called as a witness and testified about Hinckley's unwanted contact with her, describing the fear and anxiety his harassment had caused her. On June 21, 1982, after deliberating for 4 days, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity on all charges against John Hinckley. The verdict meant that while Hinckley would not be sentenced to prison, he would be committed to a mental institution until such time as he was determined to be no longer dangerous. The verdict sparked intense controversy and public outrage. Many Americans felt that Hinckley had gotten away with attempted murder, and that the insanity defense had been abused to allow a would-be assassin to escape punishment for his crimes. Public opinion polls showed that large majorities of Americans disagreed with the verdict and believed that Hinckley should have been found guilty. The reaction was particularly intense among conservatives and law and order advocates, who saw the verdict as an example of a permissive legal system that failed to hold criminals accountable for their actions. President Reagan himself, while maintaining public silence about the verdict, was reportedly disappointed with the outcome. The controversy over the Hinckley verdict led to significant changes in federal and state laws regarding the insanity defense. Many jurisdictions tightened the requirements for successful insanity pleas, shifted the burden of proof to defense attorneys, or adopted alternative verdicts such as guilty but mentally ill that would allow for both punishment and treatment. Following his acquittal, John Hinckley was committed to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a federal psychiatric facility in Washington, D.C., where he began what would become decades of treatment for his mental illness. The hospital's treatment program included medication, psychotherapy, and gradual reintegration activities designed to help Hinckley develop the skills necessary to function in society. Hinckley's confinement was closely monitored by both hospital staff and federal authorities, who were acutely aware of the public interest in his case and the need to ensure that he posed no danger to public safety. Regular evaluations were conducted to assess his mental state and his potential for violence, with particular attention paid to his obsession with Jodie Foster and his potential for attempting another attack. Over the years, Hinckley's treatment progressed slowly but steadily. He participated in various therapeutic programs, developed interests in music and art, and gradually demonstrated improved judgment and social skills. However, his case remained highly controversial, and any suggestion that he might be released generated strong opposition from victims' families and the general public. In the 1990s, Hinckley began receiving supervised visits outside the hospital, initially for medical appointments and later for recreational activities. These privileges were gradually expanded as his condition improved, though they remained subject to strict conditions and oversight. The assassination attempt on President Reagan led to significant changes in Secret Service procedures and presidential security protocols. While the service had performed well in responding to the immediate threat, the shooting revealed areas where protection could be improved. One major change was the enhancement of crowd screening procedures at presidential events. The fact that Hinckley had been able to position himself so close to the president with a loaded weapon highlighted the need for more thorough security checks and better crowd control measures. The Secret Service also improved its intelligence gathering and threat assessment capabilities, developing better systems for identifying and tracking potential threats to the president. The failure to properly flag Hinckley's 1980 arrest in Nashville led to reforms in how information about potential threats was shared between different law enforcement agencies. Medical protocols for treating wounded presidents were also upgraded following Reagan's shooting. The rapid response and excellent medical care that saved Reagan's life became a model for future emergency procedures, and hospitals along presidential travel routes were better prepared to handle similar emergencies. Perhaps most significantly, the assassination attempt led to increased awareness of the ongoing threats faced by American presidents and the importance of maintaining robust security measures even during routine public appearances. President Reagan's recovery from the assassination attempt was remarkably swift and complete. He returned to the White House after 12 days in the hospital and resumed his full schedule of presidential duties within weeks of the shooting. His graceful handling of the crisis and his quick recovery enhanced his public image and contributed to his political success. The assassination attempt actually strengthened Reagan's presidency in several ways. His courage and humor in the face of mortal danger endeared him to many Americans who had been skeptical of his leadership abilities. The image of the 70-year-old president joking with doctors while fighting for his life became a powerful symbol of American resilience and determination. Politically, the assassination attempt helped Reagan build sympathy and support for his legislative agenda. Congress, which had been resistant to some of his proposals, became more cooperative in the aftermath of the shooting, and Reagan was able to win passage of significant tax cuts and other conservative reforms. The incident also demonstrated the stability of American democratic institutions. Despite the shooting of the president and the temporary uncertainty about the chain of command, the government continued to function normally, and there was no crisis of confidence in the political system. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Hinckley case was its connection to celebrity stalking and the vulnerability of public figures to obsessed fans. Jodie Foster, who was just 18 years old at the time of the assassination attempt, found herself thrust into an unwanted spotlight as details of Hinckley's obsession became public. Foster's experience highlighted the serious psychological impact that stalking can have on victims, even when they are not physically harmed. She was forced to live with the knowledge that her image and career had been used to justify an attempted presidential assassination, and she faced ongoing concerns about her safety and privacy. The case also raised important questions about the responsibility of the entertainment industry for the content it produces and its potential impact on mentally unstable individuals. While most people understood that Taxi Driver was a work of fiction and that its violent content was not meant to be emulated, Hinckley's obsession with the film demonstrated how disturbed individuals might interpret entertainment as a call to action. Foster handled the situation with remarkable maturity and dignity, refusing to be intimidated by Hinckley's actions, while also avoiding any statements or behavior that might encourage copycat incidents. She continued her acting career and educational pursuits, eventually becoming one of Hollywood's most respected actresses and directors. The attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan had lasting effects on American society and politics that extended far beyond the immediate consequences of the shooting itself. Legal reform. The controversy over Hinckley's insanity verdict led to widespread changes in criminal law, with many states tightening their insanity defense statutes or adopting alternative verdicts that allowed for both punishment and treatment of mentally ill defendants. Mental health awareness. The case brought increased attention to issues of mental health treatment and the challenges of identifying and helping individuals who might pose a danger to themselves or others. However, it also contributed to stigmatization of mental illness and resistance to treatment in some quarters. Asterisk, asterisk, celebrity security. Asterisk, asterisk. The connection between Hinckley's obsession with Jodie Foster and his violent actions led to increased awareness of celebrity stalking and improved security measures for public figures in the entertainment industry. Asterisk, asterisk, gun control debate. Asterisk, asterisk. Although Reagan himself did not support gun control measures, the shooting of the president and the permanent disability of James Brady eventually contributed to passage of the Brady Bill in 1993, which required background checks for handgun purchases. Asterisk, asterisk, presidential image. Asterisk, asterisk. Reagan's handling of the assassination attempt contributed to his image as a strong, resilient leader and helped establish his reputation as one of America's most popular presidents. John Hinckley remained at St. Elizabeth's Hospital for more than 3 decades after the assassination attempt, gradually earning increased privileges and supervised release as his condition improved. In 2016, after extensive legal proceedings and psychiatric evaluations, he was granted full release from the hospital to live with his elderly mother in Virginia. Hinckley's release was controversial and opposed by many who felt that he should remain confined for the rest of his life. However, psychiatric experts testified that he no longer posed a danger to himself or others, and that his mental condition had stabilized through decades of treatment and medication. Since his release, Hinckley has lived quietly and has complied with all conditions of his supervised release, including restrictions on his travel, internet use, and contact with the media. He has expressed remorse for his actions and has stated that he no longer suffers from the delusions that led to the assassination attempt. The attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan on March 30, 1981, represents one of the most dramatic and consequential crimes in American political history. While the immediate physical damage was limited, Reagan recovered fully, and the other victims survived their injuries. The psychological and political impact of the attack reverberated through American society for decades. John Hinckley's obsession with Jodie Foster and his identification with a fictional movie character demonstrated the dangerous intersection of mental illness, celebrity culture, and easy access to firearms. His ability to get close enough to shoot the president despite Secret Service protection highlighted the ongoing vulnerability of American leaders to determined attackers. The attack also revealed the resilience of both Reagan personally and American democratic institutions more broadly. Reagan's grace under pressure and quick recovery enhanced his presidency and provided a model of leadership during crisis. The smooth functioning of government during the emergency demonstrated the stability of American democratic systems. Perhaps most importantly, the assassination attempt forced Americans to confront difficult questions about mental illness, celebrity obsession, gun violence, and the balance between public access to leaders and security concerns. While not all of these questions have been satisfactorily answered, the national conversation sparked by Hinckley's attack has contributed to important reforms in law enforcement, mental health treatment, and public safety. The image of President Reagan joking with doctors while fighting for his life became an enduring symbol of American strength and optimism. In trying to destroy Reagan's presidency, John Hinckley had inadvertently helped to strengthen it, demonstrating once again the unpredictable consequences of political violence. Today, more than 4 decades after the shooting, the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan serves as a reminder of both the vulnerabilities and the strengths of American democracy. While the attack showed that even the most powerful leader in the world could be brought down by a disturbed individual with a small pistol, it also demonstrated that American institutions and values are strong enough to withstand such assaults and emerge even stronger. Story 5, the Sarah Jane Moore assassination attempt. September 17, 1975. The morning of September 17, 1975, found President Gerald Ford in San Francisco for what should have been a routine day of political appearances and meetings with local Democratic leaders. Just 12 days earlier, Ford had survived an assassination attempt by Lynette Squeaky Fromm in nearby Sacramento, and security was heightened as the president continued his West Coast visit. As Ford emerged from the St. Francis Hotel at 3:30 p.m. to walk across the street to his waiting limousine, few could have predicted that within seconds, another gunshot would ring out, this time from a middle-aged housewife and FBI informant whose political radicalization had convinced her that killing the president was a revolutionary act. The shooter was Sarah Jane Moore, a 45-year-old former FBI informant and political activist whose complex double life had led her down a path of increasingly radical politics and personal instability. Her shot, fired from a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver at a distance of about 40 feet, missed President Ford by mere inches, but wounded a bystander and sent the nation into shock. Coming so soon after the Fromm attempt, Moore's attack would mark an unprecedented period of threats against an American president and raise serious questions about both presidential security and the dangerous world of political extremism in 1970s America. Gerald Rudolph Ford had become president under the most unusual circumstances in American history, ascending to the nation's highest office without ever being elected as either president or vice president. Ford had been serving as House Minority Leader when Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned in disgrace in October 1973, leading President Richard Nixon to nominate Ford as his new vice president under the 25th Amendment. When Nixon himself resigned in August 1974 following the Watergate scandal, Ford became president, inheriting a nation racked by political scandal, economic recession, and social upheaval. His presidency began with his controversial decision to pardon Nixon for any crimes he might have committed while in office, a move that was intended to help the nation heal, but instead generated intense criticism and suspicion about Ford's motives. By September 1975, Ford was facing significant political challenges. The economy was struggling with high inflation and unemployment. The Vietnam War had ended in humiliating defeat just months earlier, and Ford was facing primary challenges from conservative Ronald Reagan for the 1976 Republican nomination. His approval ratings were modest, and many Americans viewed him as an accidental president who lacked the mandate and vision necessary to lead the country effectively. Ford's trip to California in September 1975 was part of his effort to strengthen his political position and build support for his presidency. However, the trip had already been marred by the assassination attempt by Squeaky Fromm on September 5th in Sacramento, an incident that had shocked the nation and raised serious questions about the president's safety. To understand Sarah Jane Moore's attempt on President Ford's life, it is essential to understand the political climate of the mid-1970s and the various radical movements that had emerged from the social upheavals of the previous decade. The 1960s had witnessed unprecedented social and political turmoil, including the civil rights movement, anti-war protests, the rise of the counterculture, and various revolutionary movements that challenged traditional American institutions and values. By the 1970s, some of these movements had evolved into more extreme and violent forms. Groups like the Weather Underground, the Black Panthers, and the Symbionese Liberation Army had embraced revolutionary violence as a means of bringing about social change, conducting bombings, kidnappings, and other terrorist activities that had captured national attention and generated significant fear among the general public. The Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, was particularly significant in this context, as Moore had developed connections to this group and had been influenced by their radical ideology. The SLA had gained national notoriety in 1974 for kidnapping newspaper heiress Patty Hearst and subsequently converting her to their cause, leading to a series of bank robberies and other criminal activities that had transfixed the American media. The SLA's revolutionary ideology combined elements of Black nationalism, anti-capitalism, and violent resistance to what they saw as an oppressive American system. They viewed political assassination as a legitimate tactic in their war against the establishment, and their influence on Moore would prove crucial to her decision to attempt to kill President Ford. Sarah Jane Moore was born Sarah Jane Kahn on February 15, 1930, in Charleston, West Virginia, to a middle-class Jewish family. Her early life appeared conventional and unremarkable. She was an intelligent student who showed interest in nursing and social work, eventually graduating from the University of South Carolina with a nursing degree. Moore's adult life, however, was marked by instability and a series of failed relationships and career changes that would gradually lead her toward political radicalization. She married and divorced several times, had multiple children with different men, and struggled to establish a stable career or a consistent source of income. By the early 1970s, Moore had moved to San Francisco and had become involved in various political and social causes, initially working with more mainstream organizations focused on civil rights and social justice issues. However, her political views gradually became more radical as she became exposed to revolutionary ideology and began to see violence as a necessary tool for social change. What made Moore's case particularly complex was her simultaneous involvement with both radical political groups and federal law enforcement agencies. Beginning in 1974, Moore had begun working as an FBI informant, providing information about radical political groups in the San Francisco Bay Area, including members of the SLA and other revolutionary organizations. Moore's role as an informant was part of the FBI's broader effort to infiltrate and monitor radical political groups during the 1970s, a program that involved hundreds of informants and undercover agents throughout the country. However, Moore's effectiveness as an informant was limited by her own radical sympathies and her tendency to become emotionally involved with the people she was supposed to be monitoring. Moore's work as an FBI informant placed her in an increasingly difficult and psychologically complex situation. On one hand, she was providing information to federal agents about the activities and plans of radical political groups. On the other hand, she was genuinely sympathetic to many of the causes and grievances that motivated these groups, and she found herself torn between her official duties and her personal political convictions. This conflict was exacerbated by Moore's personality and psychological makeup. She was described by those who knew her as emotionally unstable, prone to dramatic gestures, and desperately seeking approval and attention from others. Her work as an informant provided her with a sense of importance and purpose, but it also isolated her from both the radical community she was monitoring and the law enforcement community she was serving. Moore's relationship with the FBI became increasingly strained during 1975 as her political views became more radical and her reliability as an informant declined. FBI agents began to question her loyalty and effectiveness, while Moore herself became increasingly resentful of her role and convinced that she was being used by the government to harm people whose political views she had come to share. The breaking point came in the summer of 1975 when Moore's cover as an FBI informant was blown, exposing her to potential retaliation from the radical groups she had been monitoring. The FBI, no longer able to use her effectively and concerned about her stability, terminated their relationship with Moore and left her without the sense of purpose and importance that her informant work had provided. Following her termination as an FBI informant, Moore's mental state deteriorated rapidly. She felt betrayed by the government she had served and increasingly isolated from both her former radical associates, who now viewed her as a traitor, and the mainstream society she had never fully embraced. Moore's decision to attempt to assassinate President Ford appears to have been motivated by a complex mixture of personal grievances, political ideology, and psychological instability. She had come to view Ford as a symbol of everything she believed was wrong with American society: the continuation of policies that oppressed minorities and the poor, the maintenance of an economic system that benefited the wealthy at the expense of ordinary people, and the perpetuation of American imperialism around the world. In the days leading up to her assassination attempt, Moore had become increasingly agitated and had made statements to several people indicating that she was contemplating violence. She had told at least one acquaintance that she was considering killing President Ford, though it is unclear whether these statements were taken seriously at the time. Moore's preparation for the assassination attempt was minimal, reflecting both her amateur status and her impulsive decision-making. She had purchased a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver just days before Ford's visit to San Francisco, and she had done little reconnaissance or planning beyond determining when and where the president would be appearing in public. September 17, 1975, was a busy day for President Ford's visit to San Francisco. The president had several scheduled appearances, including meetings with local political leaders and a speech to the World Affairs Council. Security was heightened following the Squeaky Fromm assassination attempt just 12 days earlier, but Ford's schedule proceeded largely as planned. Moore had learned of Ford's appearance at the St. Francis Hotel through news reports and had decided that this would provide her with the opportunity she was seeking to attack the president. She arrived at the hotel area in the early afternoon and positioned herself across the street from the hotel entrance, where she knew Ford would emerge. The area around the St. Francis Hotel had been secured by the Secret Service, but the security perimeter was not as extensive as it would be in later years. Members of the public were able to gather on the sidewalks and in nearby areas to watch the president's departure, and Moore was able to position herself among these onlookers without attracting attention from security personnel. At approximately 3:30 p.m., President Ford emerged from the St. Francis Hotel, accompanied by his security detail, and began walking toward his waiting limousine, which was parked across the street. Ford appeared relaxed and was acknowledging the crowd of onlookers who had gathered to see him. As President Ford walked across the street toward his limousine, Sarah Jane Moore pulled out her .38 caliber revolver and took aim at the president from a distance of approximately 40 feet. Unlike the squeaky frummy attempt 12 days earlier, Moore's gun was properly loaded and ready to fire. Moore fired a single shot at President Ford, but her aim was affected by several factors that may have saved the president's life. First, Oliver Sipple, a former Marine who was standing near Moore in the crowd, noticed her drawing her weapon and lunged toward her just as she fired, possibly jarring her arm and affecting her aim. Second, Moore's lack of experience with firearms and the stress of the moment may have contributed to her inaccuracy. The bullet missed President Ford by approximately 6 inches, passing over his head and across the street, where it struck the facade of the hotel and ricocheted. A concrete fragment from the ricochet struck Oliver Sipple in the chest, causing a minor injury, but demonstrating how close the shot had come to potentially causing serious harm. President Ford's reaction to the gunshot was immediate and professional. Unlike his response to the squeaky from attempt, where he had not initially realized that a weapon had been fired, Ford clearly heard Moore's shot and recognized it as a threat. He ducked and allowed his Secret Service agents to quickly escort him to his limousine, which immediately departed for the airport. Sarah Jane Moore made no attempt to escape after firing her shot and was immediately apprehended by Secret Service agents and San Francisco police officers. She dropped her revolver and offered no resistance to her arrest, appearing almost relieved to have been caught. The area around the St. Francis Hotel was quickly secured as a crime scene, and additional law enforcement personnel were called in to assist with the investigation. Moore was taken into custody and transported to federal holding facilities, where she would await charges for attempting to assassinate the president. Oliver Sipple, the former Marine who had tried to stop Moore from firing, was treated for his minor injury and was widely praised as a hero for his quick thinking and courage. However, Sipple's moment in the spotlight would later become controversial when news reports revealed that he was gay, a fact that he had not made public and that would cause him significant personal difficulties in the years that followed. President Ford, meanwhile, was quickly escorted to Air Force One and departed San Francisco for Washington, cutting short his visit to California. The president was unharmed by the attack, but was visibly shaken by this second assassination attempt in less than 2 weeks. The FBI's investigation into Moore's assassination attempt was extensive and quickly established the basic facts of the case. Moore had acted alone, with no evidence of a broader conspiracy or assistance from others. However, her background as a former FBI informant added complexity to the case and raised embarrassing questions for the Bureau about their relationship with her. Investigators discovered that Moore had purchased her revolver legally just days before the assassination attempt, highlighting weaknesses in the firearms screening systems of the time. They also found evidence of her radical political views and her connections to various extremist groups in the San Francisco Bay Area. Most troubling for the FBI was the revelation of Moore's work as an informant and the circumstances surrounding the termination of that relationship. The Bureau faced criticism for their handling of Moore's case and questions about whether they had adequately monitored her mental state and potential for violence after ending their professional relationship with her. The investigation also examined the security failures that had allowed Moore to get so close to President Ford with a loaded weapon. While the Secret Service had increased security following the squeaky from attempt, the Moore shooting demonstrated that significant vulnerabilities remained in presidential protection protocols. Sarah Jane Moore was charged with attempting to assassinate the President of the United States, a federal crime that carried a potential sentence of life imprisonment. Her case was handled in federal court in San Francisco, where she was represented by court-appointed attorneys who faced the challenge of defending a client who had been caught in the act of attempting to kill the president. Unlike some other would-be assassins, Moore did not attempt to claim insanity or deny her actions. She admitted to firing the shot at President Ford and expressed no remorse for her actions, maintaining that she had been motivated by political convictions rather than personal animosity toward the president. Moore's defense strategy focused on her mental state at the time of the shooting and the circumstances that had led to her radicalization. Her attorneys argued that her work as an FBI informant had contributed to her psychological instability and that she had been manipulated and then abandoned by the federal government. However, the evidence against Moore was overwhelming, and her own admissions made it difficult to mount an effective defense. On January 15, 1976, Moore pleaded guilty to the assassination attempt and was sentenced to life in prison, avoiding a trial that might have revealed more embarrassing details about her relationship with the FBI. The two assassination attempts on President Ford within 17 days of each other had a profound impact on Secret Service protocols and presidential security procedures. The attacks demonstrated that the threats to presidential safety had not diminished since the assassinations of the 1960s, and that new approaches to protection were needed. One immediate change was the expansion of security perimeters around the president during public appearances. The Secret Service began creating larger buffer zones between the president and members of the public, making it more difficult for potential attackers to get close enough to use small-caliber weapons effectively. The service also enhanced its threat assessment and intelligence gathering capabilities, recognizing that both Fromm and Moore had given warning signs of their violent intentions that had not been properly identified or acted upon. Better coordination with other law enforcement agencies and improved screening of individuals with access to presidential events became priorities. Perhaps most significantly, the attacks led to a fundamental change in how presidents interacted with the public. The informal, accessible style of presidential appearances that had characterized earlier eras was replaced by more formal, heavily secured events that limited spontaneous contact between presidents and ordinary citizens. One of the most tragic aspects of the Sarah Jane Moore case was the treatment of Oliver Sipple, the hero who had tried to prevent the assassination attempt. Sipple, a former Marine who had served in Vietnam, had acted instinctively to protect the president and had potentially saved Ford's life by interfering with Moore's shot. However, Sipple's heroism was overshadowed by the revelation that he was gay, a fact that was disclosed by news reports despite his desire to keep his sexual orientation private. In the mid-1970s, homosexuality was still widely stigmatized, and Sipple faced significant personal and professional consequences from the unwanted publicity. Sipple sued several newspapers for invasion of privacy, but his lawsuits were unsuccessful. He struggled with depression and alcoholism in the years following the assassination attempt and eventually died in 1989 at the age of 47. His treatment highlighted the complex social issues of the 1970s and the personal costs that could result from becoming involved in high-profile events. Sarah Jane Moore was incarcerated in federal prison following her conviction, beginning what would be a lengthy period of imprisonment that would last for more than 3 decades. She was initially held at various federal facilities before eventually being transferred to the Federal Medical Center in Carswell, Texas. During her imprisonment, Moore continued to express radical political views and showed little remorse for her actions. She participated in various prison programs and activities, but remained committed to her belief that political violence was justified under certain circumstances. Moore made several attempts to escape from prison during her early years of incarceration, including a successful but brief escape in 1979 when she climbed over a fence at the federal prison in Alderson, West Virginia. She was recaptured the next day, and the escape attempt resulted in additional charges and a longer sentence. Over the years, Moore's political views gradually moderated, and she began to express some regret for her actions. She participated in educational programs and eventually earned a college degree while in prison. Her behavior improved, and she became eligible for various prison privileges and programs. After serving 32 years in federal prison, Sarah Jane Moore was granted parole and released on December 31, 2007, at the age of 77. Her release was controversial and opposed by some who believed she should remain in prison for the rest of her life. Moore's parole was granted based on several factors, including her advanced age, her improved behavior in prison, and her participation in rehabilitation programs. Prison officials and psychologists who had evaluated her concluded that she no longer posed a significant threat to public safety. Following her release, Moore lived quietly in upstate New York under the supervision of federal parole officers. She was subject to various restrictions on her movement and activities, but was generally able to live a normal life for the first time in over 3 decades. In interviews following her release, Moore expressed regret for her actions and acknowledged that attempting to assassinate President Ford had been wrong. She described her younger self as a very different person and said that she had come to understand the futility and immorality of political violence. The Sarah Jane Moore assassination attempt must be understood within the broader context of political violence in 1970s America. The decade was marked by numerous incidents of domestic terrorism, political assassinations, and other forms of violent political expression that reflected the deep social and political divisions of the era. Moore's case was particularly significant because it demonstrated how individuals could become radicalized through exposure to extremist ideologies and personal grievances against the government. Her background as an FBI informant added complexity to her case and highlighted the potential dangers of using unstable individuals in law enforcement operations. The attempt also illustrated the challenges facing law enforcement agencies in identifying and preventing threats to public officials. Both Moore and Squeaky Fromm had given warning signs of their violent intentions, but these signs had not been properly recognized or acted upon by the authorities responsible for protecting the president. From a psychological perspective, Moore's case demonstrated the complex motivations that could drive individuals to political violence. Her attempt on Ford's life was motivated by a combination of political ideology, personal grievances, and psychological instability that made her a particularly dangerous and unpredictable threat. President Ford's response to the two assassination attempts reflected both his personal courage and his commitment to maintaining the openness and accessibility of the American presidency. Despite the obvious dangers, Ford refused to significantly curtail his public appearances or adopt a bunker mentality that would have isolated him from the American people. Ford's determination to continue his normal presidential duties sent an important message about the resilience of American democratic institutions and the refusal to allow terrorists and extremists to dictate the behavior of elected officials. His courage in the face of repeated threats enhanced his reputation and demonstrated the qualities of leadership that many Americans found reassuring during a difficult period in the nation's history. However, Ford's administration also recognized the need to improve presidential security and worked closely with the Secret Service to implement new protection protocols. These changes would influence how future presidents approach public appearances and would contribute to the increasingly elaborate security arrangements that surround modern presidents. The assassination attempts on President Ford had lasting effects on American politics and society that extended beyond the immediate security implications. The attacks contributed to a growing sense that political violence had become more common and acceptable in American society, a perception that would influence political discourse for years to come. The attempts also highlighted the role of radical political movements in American society and the potential for these movements to inspire individual acts of violence. The connection between Moore and various extremist groups demonstrated how radical ideologies could motivate ordinary citizens to commit extraordinary acts of violence. Perhaps most significantly, the assassination attempts contributed to the increasing isolation of American presidents from the general public. The security measures implemented following the Moore and Fromm attacks would evolve into the elaborate protection systems that surround modern presidents, fundamentally changing the relationship between America's leaders and the people they serve. The Sarah Jane Moore assassination attempt offers several important lessons about political violence, domestic terrorism, and the challenges of protecting public officials in a democratic society. Asterisk, asterisk, the complexity of radicalization, asterisk, asterisk. Moore's path from middle-class housewife to would-be assassin demonstrates how individuals can become radicalized through a complex process involving political ideology, personal grievances, and psychological instability. Asterisk, asterisk, the dangers of informant programs. Asterisk, asterisk. Moore's background as an FBI informant highlights the potential risks of using unstable individuals in law enforcement operations and the importance of monitoring former informants who may pose security threats. Asterisk, asterisk, the importance of threat assessment. Asterisk, asterisk, the failure to identify and act upon the warning signs exhibited by both Moore and Squeaky Fromm demonstrated the need for better systems for identifying and evaluating potential threats to public officials. Asterisk, asterisk, the balance between security and accessibility. Asterisk, asterisk, the assassination attempts forced American society to confront the difficult balance between protecting political leaders and maintaining the openness and accessibility that are essential to democratic governance. The attempted assassination of President Gerald Ford by Sarah Jane Moore on September 17, 1975, represents a crucial moment in American political history that exposed the vulnerabilities of democratic institutions and the complex motivations behind political violence. Moore's transformation from FBI informant to would-be assassin illustrates the dangerous intersection of political extremism, personal instability, and institutional failure that characterized much of the political violence of the 1970s. The attack, coming just 12 days after Squeaky Frommy's attempt on Ford's life, created an unprecedented crisis of presidential security and forced fundamental changes in how America protects its leaders. While Ford's personal courage and determination to continue his presidential duties demonstrated the resilience of Democratic leadership, the attacks also marked the beginning of an era of increased isolation and security that has fundamentally altered the relationship between presidents and the public. Moore's case also highlights the complex world of political informants and undercover operations that characterized law enforcement efforts to monitor radical groups during the 1970s. Her dual role as both informant and extremist demonstrates the dangers inherent in such operations and the potential for them to create the very threats they are intended to prevent. Perhaps most significantly, the assassination attempt serves as a reminder of the ongoing threats faced by democratic societies from individuals who believe that political violence is justified by ideological convictions. Moore's willingness to attempt murder based on her political beliefs reflects the potential for extremist ideologies to motivate ordinary citizens to extraordinary acts of violence. The shot fired by Sarah Jane Moore on that September afternoon in San Francisco missed its target by mere inches, but its impact on American society and politics continues to reverberate nearly 5 decades later. The incident serves as a permanent reminder of both the fragility and the resilience of democratic institutions, and of the ongoing need to balance the protection of political leaders with the openness and accessibility that are essential to democratic governance. Today, as America continues to grapple with political extremism and threats to public officials, the Sarah Jane Moore case offers important lessons about the complex factors that can drive individuals to political violence and the crucial importance of identifying and addressing such threats before they result in tragedy. Her story remains a cautionary tale about the dangerous consequences that can result when personal grievances, political extremism, and institutional failure intersect in a single individual with access to weapons and opportunity for violence. Let the hush of the night wrap around you. And know this: some stories don't end. They drift. They dream. They wait for you to listen again. Good night.